Give me one moment to make sure the live stream is rolling.
Starting it right now.
We are good to go. Thank you. At this time, will all sergeants please start their recordings? Recording to the computer has begun.
Cloud recording underway.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing for the Committee on Public Housing, joint with the Subcommittee on Capital Budget. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video for verification purposes? And we ask to minimize disruptions, please place all electronic devices to vibrate or silent mode. And if you'd like to submit testimony, please send via email to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending today's joint hearing of the Committee on Public Housing and the Subcommittee on the Capital Budget. I am Council Member Alika Ampry Samuel, and I am the chair of the Council's Committee on Public Housing. Today, the committees will be taking a closer look at NYCHA's capital spending, with particular attention to how NYCHA is spending city allocated funds. I would like to thank my colleague, Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, for co-chairing this important hearing with me. And I would also like to take the time to acknowledge that we are joined today by Majority Leader Lori Cumbo, Minority Leader Matteo, Councilmember Diaz Sr., Councilmember Jonai, Councilmember Kevin Riley, Councilmember Van Bramer, Councilmember Ayala, Councilmember Feliz, Councilmember Adams, Councilmember Brooks Powers, and Councilmember Grodenchik. As I open this hearing, I reflect on the many times we have convened over the past 4 years. I always remind my colleagues, NYCHA residents, and NYCHA executive leadership that the main goal is to improve and increase the level of service delivered to the residents of the New York City Housing Authority, New York City's largest landlord. Nearly 1 year ago, on December 30th, 2020, NYCHA released its 5-year capital plan, which provides $7.4 billion in planned commitments to improve NYCHA's infrastructure. The plan includes federal, state, and city capital funding, the latter accounting for about 40% of the total funding. A large swatch of that 40% includes approximately $1.6 billion, which is dedicated to addressing the major issue areas outlined in the 2019 HUD agreement: lead-based paint problems, remediating mold, providing heat, repairing elevators, and eliminating pests. The agreement notwithstanding, even where notable progress has been made, major issues continue to persist in the major pillar areas. Residents continue to be plagued with elevators that have been out of service for weeks on end, long-term gas shutoffs, mold and mold-related sickness, extreme cold in units, lack of groundskeeping, broken locks, safety breaches, and more. Addressing these issues in any meaningful way is costly. They require major physical improvements and not just Band-Aids or quick fix solutions. According to NYCHA's 2017 Physical Needs Assessment, NYCHA estimates that its projected capital costs are about $31.8 billion over a 5-year period and an additional $45.2 billion over 20 years. Those are big figures. And whenever issues with heat, mold, lead, elevators, and pests are raised with NYCHA, the response is just, there's a lack of capital to really address all of the problems. But we also don't have a clear understanding of what is being done and what has been completed. The HUD agreement requires the city to provide funding on top of what NYCHA receives from the federal government to address these issues. As I've mentioned, NYCHA's current 5-year plan includes 1.6 billion city dollars, with the HUD agreement requiring the city to provide a total of 2.2 billion in incremental capital funding over 10 years. It may not be enough to address all of NYCHA's capital needs, but it's a major funding source that is available to NYCHA. Oddly, NYCHA's capital commitment rate is low. In fiscal year 2021, NYCHA committed just 103.1 million of the $1.6 billion. So when we hear NYCHA say we don't have the money, what this council is saying, here is a significant sum of money. What are you doing with it? And why are you not spending it in that certain way to address certain problems? That's the critical question that we hope to hear an answer to today. As always, the point of this hearing is to have a meaningful conversation about capital resources available to NYCHA, how NYCHA is using those resources, and if not, why not? And to think about ways that those resources can be used most efficiently to deliver the best possible service to NYCHA residents. We know that NYCHA's aging housing stock creates a complex dynamic, as many buildings are actively falling into increasingly worse states of disrepair. And we know that the needs are so great that they even overshadow the progress that's being made. Today is one of the last hearings that I will have as the chair of this committee as we move closer to December 31st. And I would be remiss if I didn't again suggest a friendly user capital tracking tool with snapshots at any given point in time that would be extremely important to the residents and the public. I know where we were 4 years ago. And as we get a picture of where we are today, it would be ever helpful for my incoming colleagues to be able to obtain this information of where NYCHA is right now as it relates to its capital needs and its designations, so that everyone can have a better start come January. So with that, I will turn it over to my co-chair, Council Member Helen Rosenthal, for her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair Emprey Samuel. Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Helen Rosenthal, Chair of the Subcommittee on Capital Budget. Councilmember and Chair Emprey Samuel laid out the issues that are relevant here so very well, and I don't want to repeat too much, but I do want to reiterate that it's no secret that NYCHA has a tremendous need for capital improvements. NYCHA's reports themselves demonstrate that need. The need is billions upon billions of dollars, and with every 5-year plan, those dollar amounts needed increase exponentially. While this NYCHA may not have at its fingers the total amount of money that it needs, it does have a significant amount of money, and NYCHA's not spending that money. Obviously, when you don't spend the money, things only get worse, and the state of disrepair gets worse. So we have to wonder what's going on here. At the last budget hearing, Chair Russ said that it's much easier to spend federal and state dollars, and therefore NYCHA spends a greater percentage of their allocation of those dollars, but that the city procurement process is just too complicated and too difficult to be able to allow them to spend any city dollars. you know, the spending rate for other agencies, capital spending rate, while not at 100%, which is where we'd like to see it, is at least at 61%. So DEP, DOT, they have the ability, their capital project team has the ability to spend 61% of its city dollars. And I assume that they are available to the NYCHA capital team to let the NYCHA capital team know how they do it. You know, I just want to end by saying that, as the chair mentioned, NYCHA now has a federal monitor to require NYCHA to spend money to fix certain issues, capital issues. And in May 2021, the monitor signed off on a NYCHA capital spending plan, which included detailed reporting requirements. Remember, this is a plan that NYCHA presented to the monitor. So it was their idea, and it articulated exact reporting requirements, which would get at the transparency and identify where there might be challenges that we could help the NYCHA capital team overcome. The first report was due on October 31st of this year. And I've asked to see the report and have not heard back. Maybe at this hearing, NYCHA will present it. But in looking at the website for the monitor, I don't see it up there. So I'm looking forward to this hearing, looking forward to hearing about all the good work that NYCHA is doing to expedite spending so we can get at the hellacious situation that we're in now in terms of deteriorating capital. Thank you so much, Chair Impri-Samuel.
Thank you, Chair Rosenthal. As is customary for the Public Housing Committee, we will next hear from a panel of residents themselves before turning to NYCHA and the administration for their testimony. So I will now turn it over to Committee Counsel Audrey Sun to go over some procedural items.
Thanks very much, Chair. My name is Audrey Sun. I'm counsel to the City Council's Committee on Public Housing. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify. Please listen for your name to be called, and when it is your turn, I will call your name and you will be unmuted. We will now hear from an opening panel of NYCHA residents, followed by council member questions, if any. In order to hear from everyone, the clock will be set to 2 minutes. First, we will hear from Aixa Torres, and then we will hear from followed by Mary McGee, and followed then by Karen Blundell. Ms. Torres.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Samuel and Chairwoman Rosenthal and all the members and my colleague TA presidents that are on this call. I'm here as the president of the Resident Association of Affordable Houses, but also as a steering committee member of Residents to Preserve Public Housing. One of the biggest issues that we are finding is that the 964 regulations are not being followed. Had they been followed, NYCHA would probably have spent all their money and then some that have been allocated, because that would require that residents are listened to and that I think that no one, as one of my board members is always saying, we're on the ground. Who better than us to assess what our needs are, what needs to get done. And because we're not listened to, we get all this constant outsourcing that is unconscionable at this point. We are not listened to most of the time, and we are not part of the process. 964 requires that we are part of the process from conception when the thought is being thought. Not sign this contract and this is what you're going to get. I know that the Sandy project in my development has been a total disaster, total. And that's because exactly what I'm saying has happened, even though those were federal funds. On the capital end for the city, they need to sit down individually with every resident association board, not president board, and speak to us about what are your needs? This is how much money has been allocated and how do we do this? We also should be part of the process in terms of who the contractor is. And for anyone in procurement, I know that you could go with the cheapest, right? That's usually, just give me one more minute, I'm gonna finish. However, if you work a little bit harder, you can get the best and give us quality that we deserve as citizens and as taxpayers. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now hear from Mary McGee, followed by Karen Blundell.
Time begins. Clock is ready.
Hello, my name is Mary McGee. I'm a resident of Fulton Houses. I think more needs to be done for our developments. There is a deficit. Everybody knows that NYCHA needs money. They need more money, but they're not using the money they have to fix issues that can be resolved easily. We matter. The residents of NYCHA matter. NYCHA is doing the RAD PAC program now. So I don't understand why their deficit is still the amount they're saying. It should be going down if they're converting 66,000 units. So where's all this money going to go that they're saying they need? To the existing developments? Elevators are constantly breaking down. There's no heat, no hot water, but the repairs aren't being done. New York City gives NYCHA so much money, but it's stuck in limbo. But who's paying the price? The residents. The residents pay the price for that funding to be stuck in limbo. The residents are paying the price because that red tape and the money can't be used. It takes a few years. You know, everybody depends on Congress to pass the housing, funding. It's not happening. Nobody cares about public housing, and we need to change that. Everybody deserves quality of life. They need respect, because I feel NYCHA residents aren't respected. They need to be heard. It's not everybody always complaining, oh, I have this, I don't have that, I need this, but we're paying our rent. We deserve that and more. So I'm asking this board to please help NYCHA get that funding out of that red tape and be able to use it to on those developments that really, really need it. It's shameful that we're in heat season and developments don't have heat. So, I thank you for your time, and we need to find a better solution and help the residents that live in New York City Housing Authority. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We will now hear from Karen Blundell.
Good morning. First, I'd like to say congratulations to Alika Embry-Samuels on becoming the next regional administrator for HUD in our region. And thank you for your commitment to the public housing committee here at City Council. My name is Karen Blondell. I founded the Public Housing Civic Association. It is a 501c3 whose mission is to educate public housing around climate change, around their indoor environment, and around the economics involving public housing that we don't get. As Aisa Torres, one of the resident council leaders in Manhattan, has just testified to. The 964 rules are not being followed, and here we are at the last minute being rushed through elections across the city by New York City Housing Authority in respect to the resident councils, and the fact that we don't even have bylaws, haven't seen them bylaws, and as we question the nomination committee and the bylaws, we're not getting clear answers from New York City Housing Authority or the resident engagement. I want to go to the budget that Alika was talking about. It's not only about being given the money, but spending the money. We have residents who don't have any jobs, especially after this pandemic. We need all hands on deck. We need to open up the labor force so that it's competitive with union and non-union with prevailing wage in order to spend this money. We're not spending the money because there's a control on labor. We have all of our residents throughout public housing, especially in Red Hook, where we have a $500 million job going on right outside my window. And those residents do not have access to those jobs, and those jobs are not covered by Section 3.
Time
These
expired.
are things that have to be corrected. And again, I'm Karen Blondell with the Public Housing Civic Association, and we're here to make a change in public housing. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. I'll now pass it back to Chair Ambry Samuel before moving into testimony from the administration.
We have also been joined by Councilmember Menchaca. I'm not sure if any other members are on, but that's what I see in front of my screen. So apologies if I did not recognize you, but I will recognize you at a later opportunity. And also, Orj, I just want to make sure that we were able to call on all of the residents before we get started that wanted to speak.
Sure, I'm checking the participant panel now. If there are any other NYCHA residents who are available to speak, we would love to hear from you at this time. So please, please use the Zoom raise hand function and we'll call on you in turn, beginning with Ramona Ferreira, followed by Dana Eldon, and then Marquise Jenkins.
Thank you, Audrey.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having this hearing, which is extremely timely. As the council member mentioned in the beginning, I submitted written testimony, so I'm not going to read that. Instead, I am going to highlight a couple of points and begin by talking about the 6-year-old boy that passed away in my development at Mitchell Houses last week. Aiden was 6 years old and was raised in public housing. This fire, which burned his father half of his body and killed Aiden through smoke inhalation, is something that we have been talking about a lot at Mitchell Houses. I am convinced that NYCHA's inability to properly manage funding and to treat us with dignity and honor our rights as tenants of public housing is responsible for the death of Aiden. And I don't say that because the fire happened that night and they were trapped on the 14th floor. I say it because over the last 15 years, NYCHA has failed to properly administer the funding, remove the lead, the asbestos, the mold, the garbage, the rats, and the roaches that all contributed to aid in not having fully developed lungs, which is what children in public housing are growing up in every single day. I also want to raise the point that everyone is skirting, which is that public housing has been privatizing itself under the excuse of having obsolete units. In Aiden's building, there are 4 burnt out apartments that have been in that condition for more than 6 months. That's inexcusable. And the only reason that these apartments are being uncared for and not rehabilitated is so that NYCHA, under Greg Russ's leadership, can make the argument that these apartments should be condemned and therefore should qualify for tenant protection vouchers. At the same time, I'll finish in 1 second. At the same time, Congress, under the Build Back Better plan, has had the audacity of issuing $1 billion in tenant protection vouchers, which would implement the blueprint proposal here in New York City, ignoring what tenants have been saying for the last 18 months. So what I would like to ask the council is to think of the children in public housing, to think of the broken promises that NYCHA has made, and your responsibility as our advocates when these things come to part. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Dana Eldon.
Clock is. Go ahead.
My name is Dana Eldon, president of St. Mary's Resident Council in the South Bronx. I too am a member of an organization referred to as Residents to Prevent Public Housing, to Preserve Public Housing. And what I wanted to speak to this afternoon with regard to the budget, the capital budget of NYCHA, which I recently found out that monies that were allotted for capital projects was being sat on by NYCHA when I need 6 new roofs. One roof so severely damaged that the contractor told me that it felt like he was walking on brownies. And it's not that NYCHA doesn't know about it. They've known about it since the time of the damage of the water tank bursting and damaging our roof and the apartments below, where tenants still live in those apartments and are subject to mold, floors where you walk on them, and as you step down with your feet, water comes up through the tiles. This situation has gone on too long. And knowing now what NYCHA has received in funding and how it still sits in their house when it was supposed to be used during the 2021 year is just unacceptable. So I speak to this council to dig deeper and to make NYCHA accountable for every dime that they have and make them use what was allotted for the residents and their repairs. Make them use it. Enough is enough with this. We don't have money and we don't have this, and we got to find contractors. They've been haphazard in everything that they've done for the residents in my development, and I'm tired of it now. So this is why I'm here today, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Great, thank you very much. And we will next hear from Marquise Jenkins.
Time is ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Council Members Helen Rosenthal and Alika Ampli Samuels for holding today's hearing on NYCHA's capital spending for city funding. My name is Marquise Jenkins, and I am a NYCHA resident and community organizer. Today, I am speaking on behalf of the Residents to Preserve Public Housing. We are concerned with the inadequate amount of funding the city provides NYCHA for capital operating expenses. According to the city's finance report, the city allocated $248 million to NYCHA in 2021, leaving NYCHA with a predicted deficit of $25 million. NYCHA's Blueprint for Change proposal aims to generate $40 billion in 10 years by converting units to Section 8 and borrowing money. If the federal, state, and city government adequately funds NYCHA, that will eliminate NYCHA's argument for the need to shift to Section 8 funding and generate in private debt. While the city needs to significantly increase the amount of funding it allocates to NYCHA, we recognize the sad reality that NYCHA has a track record of wasting and mismanaging funds. RPPH urges the city to attack strong conditions onto any and all funding they provide to NYCHA. NYCHA's chairman, Gregory Ross, struggles to manage the funds received for NYCHA's capital and operating expenses. NYCHA's total capital budget was $3.2 million in fiscal year 2020. It was budgeted to be $3.6 billion in fiscal year 2021. Of the $3.2 billion budgeted for fiscal year 20, they only spent $1.2 billion, or 37.5% of the amount that was allocated. Chairman Russ continues to work with bad contractors. Russ has done nothing to hold them accountable. I'll fast forward to my closing. RPPH is asking the city council to allocate $2 billion annually for operating and capital expenses, $1 billion for resident management. We want an independent audit. We want to hold regular meetings with residents at the table, deciding when and where these meetings are taking place. And of course, we want you to denounce the blueprint and remove Gregory Ross as the chairman of NYCHA. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And I also want to recognize that we've been joined by Councilmember Traeger. And I'm not sure if I mentioned Councilmember Ayala in the beginning, but she's also with us. I want to just kind of recap everyone who spoke. Aixa Torres mentioned the need for more resident input regarding all of the projects. Miriam McGee mentioned, RAD deals and the money that's being spent, and that there's just too much red tape. Karen Blondell mentioned it's not about being given money, it's about spending the money and its connection to labor and employment opportunities, and also Section 3 opportunities. Ramona Ferreira talked about the death of 6-year-old Aiden in Mitchell houses, and connecting the fact that so much could have been done in order for little Aiden to even be able to breathe during the smoke in the apartment. Dana Eldon talked about the need for 6 new roofs in her development, and hopefully understanding where, hopefully during this conversation with NYCHA, we'll be able to understand where her development is on that priority list for new roofs. And Marquise Jenkins does what he usually does, come in and lay it all out, everything about why we are here today. And I really do appreciate you, Mr. Jenkins. And you mentioned implementing restrictions on funding and questioning the need for conversions with the funding that's coming in. And so I just wanted to put that all out there, because that sets the tone of what we're talking about and why we are here. And I thank you, residents, for always, showing up and giving your perspective. And NYCHA, I just hope in the administration, as you're answering a lot of the questions, you just make sure that you have in mind the voices that we heard at the beginning. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Audrey.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Oh, you know what, wait, I want to make sure, Chair Rosenthal, did you have any questions at all okay, all right. Okay,
great, thank you both. We will now turn to testimony from the administration. A reminder to council members to please use the Zoom raise hand function if you would like to ask any questions. After the administration gives its testimony, we will hear from the remaining members of the public. I will now administer the oath to the administration, which is represented by Stephen Lovesey, Anika Lescott, Oliver Osterwind, Eva Trimble, and Brian Honan. After I say the oath, please wait for me to call your name and respond one by one. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Stephen Lovesey?
I do.
Anika Lescott?
I do.
Oliver Osterwind?
I do.
Eva Trimble?
I do.
And Brian Honan?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you. Chairs Alika Amper-Samuel and Helen Rosenthal, members of the Committee on Public Housing and the Subcommittee on Capital Budget, other distinguished members of the City Council, residents, and the members of the public. Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Lovesey, NYCHA's Executive Vice President of Capital Projects. I am pleased to be joined by Anika Lescott, Executive Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer, Eva Trimble, Executive Vice President for Strategy and Innovation, Oliver Osterwind, Vice President for Project Management in Capital Projects Division, Brian Honan, Vice President of Intergovernmental Relations, and other members of NYCHA's team. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss NYCHA's capital program, which is committed to preserving and modernizing public housing for NYCHA residents and the City of New York. Considering the authority's significant capital needs, 40 billion and climbing, we are incredibly grateful for the Council's partnership and funding. Without your support, many important projects that contribute to the residents' quality of life would not be possible, such as playgrounds, basketball court renovations, new entrances, security cameras, and existing lighting installations. Exterior lighting installations. As the largest public housing authority in the nation, NYCHA manages a vast capital program that preserves and modernizes more than 2,200 buildings, housing nearly 400,000 residents, residing in over 2,400 acres across every borough of the city. However, decades of federal disinvestment has left our buildings needing 40 billion worth of major repairs, an astronomical figure that grows at a rate of about $1 billion a year. To best address the significant needs of our developments and to protect our investments, NYCHA established a logical building sequence when planning its work. It begins with sealing the building envelope, the roofs, the facades, the windows, and then turning to building systems like heating plants. We can move into interior renovations and grounds. NYCHA's Capital Projects Division is responsible for implementing capital construction projects from planning and design through construction and closeout. Over the past 2 years, CPD has focused on the building sequence and comprehensive design strategies, executing projects with the highest degree of safety and quality. The portfolio includes roof replacement, masonry repairs, heating plant replacement, elevator modernization, infrastructure upgrades, grounds improvements, exterior, interior lighting, lobby entrances, CCTV, to name a few. NYCHA's 10-year, this is 2022 through 2031, city capital plan totals about 4.6 billion. The majority of the funds, or about 4.4 billion, are mayoral. More than half of those funds, 2.8 billion, are allocated toward projects addressing the HUD agreement pillar areas, such as heat, elevators, lead, and mold. NYCHA's city council funding totals about 125 million in the 10-year plan. The discretionary allocations from council members are an essential source of funds for vital quality projects that benefit the residents greatly, such as playgrounds, basketball court renovations, exterior lighting installations, entrances, security enhancements, and community amenities. NYCHA takes responsibility for the frustrations around city council discretionary projects, and we are committed to improving our performance through new management and partnerships. For instance, CPD hired a new government liaison in 22 to streamline communication between all parties. We also established a project management team whose assignments involve city discretionary funding projects. This is a significant benefit so that we enhance, we take the staff and they're more knowledgeable about the complexities of the city procurement and the lessons learned. To enhance transparency, NYCHA recently joined Checkbook New York City, and by moving from paper to electronic submission of registration packages for the Comptroller's Office this year, we are speeding up the contract registration process while also providing ready insight into the status of these packages. And I'd like to thank OMB and Comptroller's staff, particularly the IT departments, on helping us with that. As I mentioned, council members are a vital part of the authority. Especially when it comes to identifying projects that will go a long way in improving residents' quality of life. Our partnership with residents and other stakeholders is also furthering our work. For example, CPD's Connected Communities Initiative leverages public-private partnerships to enhance residents' quality of life through improvements to outdoor spaces at our developments. The initiative also serves as a roadmap for dialogue and engagement with our partners. We know how important it is to engage with the residents, the development staff, the elected officials, and other members of the community in the planning, the design, and the implementation of those projects. Our goals of accountability, transparency, and increased participation with the partners are supported with our new standard procedure stakeholder engagement, which rolled out with training this year. In conclusion, NYCHA strives every day to be good stewards of the funding we receive to preserve public housing and to provide a better quality of life for our residents. However, we know we need to continue to improve the timelines of city discretionary funded projects. I would like to emphasize again that NYCHA's partnership with Council is crucial and we value it highly. From many meetings and conversations, I've taken your suggestions to heart and incorporated them into the way we do business. Your support and generosity are critical. We wouldn't be able to complete many of the projects that matter most to the residents with federal funding alone. Thank you, and we are grateful for your support, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. And we look forward to keeping you updated on the status of the efforts to improve our developments, as well as the residents' quality of life.
Thank you. We will now move to questions from Chair Ampry-Samuel, followed by questions from Chair Rosenthal.
Thank you. I just want to recognize that we've been joined by Council Member Chin as well. And we're going to do things a little different today because this is a joint hearing. I don't want to ask a bunch of questions and then get caught up and then turn around and kick it to Chair Rosenthal. And so we are going to tag team this and ask questions together. It just makes sense. And I think that we'll have a better conversation and the discussion should flow a lot better with the both of us asking questions. And so I'll start with, historically, NYCHA has had a significantly lower city capital commitment rate when compared to the citywide average. For instance, in fiscal 2021, NYCHA had actual commitments of approximately $103.1 million against a plan of $1.6 billion, or 6.4% of the total planned commitments. The citywide commitment rate for fiscal 2021 was approximately 61.7%. So that's 61.7% compared to NYCHA's 6.4%. And this reminds me of what Karen Blondell said, right? Where you have money, but not spending the money. And so what metrics are used to track NYCHA's spending of city capital dollars? And can you explain why the authority is having so much difficulty in committing its city capital funding?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. I'll answer it in a couple of stages. As you know, NYCHA has one of the largest capital programs in the city, and it is in a unique position with a large occupied resident portfolio and severely distressed infrastructure. This type of commitment rate comparison is not apples to apples. And NYCHA has spent considerable time collaborating with our federal oversight partners and planning on how best to leverage the capital plan to correct the deficiencies and the problems across the pillar areas of the HUD agreement. The time spent was intentional and purposeful, and more important to us than the commitment rate, because we wanted to make sure that we were spending the dollars wisely. Our capital plan, which was released in May of 2021. This is the agreement that allows us to move those funds forward. And we are now that that agreement is hit and we have access to those funds, we're working on implementing the plan and preparing to spend this funds.
Okay, so you just mentioned not apples to apples. Can you just explain what are the exact challenges to spending the capital dollars and where in that process, if you can explain to us where in that process are you experiencing the most difficulty?
Yep. So
and I said I get the action plans you have, but that's new and this has been an issue. And so I'm just hoping that you can give us a little more detail.
No, thank you very much. So although the funds come in every year and we've had 3 years of funding, those funds have not been accessible to us. And so it works against the commitment rate. If you have 3 years of funding, almost more than $500 million, I think it's around $750 million, then obviously your percentages don't work because you don't have access to those. This year, we worked with OMB to right-size our portfolio based against our obligations and expenditures, and those 3 years shift so that way we can actually spend those funds. So as soon as the action plan was approved, we are able to now spend those dollars, and then we presented a strategy in which we could spend the dollars that we're getting.
Can you give us an example of something that has been stalled and you're having a conversation with OMB and now you're ready to move forward because you addressed that specific problem? And maybe an example,
yeah.
An example from the testimony this morning. I mean, the testimony earlier, maybe from Dana Eldon with the roof repairs. Is that a good example to use?
Yes, I mean, I can give you an example of a typical city investment versus a federal and state investment. Is that, I think, what you're asking about? One, I just want to say that this was an important move for us in terms of the agreement funds, because we wanted to make sure that we're spending those funds accurately. And now that we have an action plan, we've actually are working on accelerating a lot of the projects on waste management. In terms of our roofing program, there was a wonderful, there's a lot of money that was spent to the Housing Authority, and we are spending those down. We're actually accelerating that program, and we've been able to work with OMB to get design fees in 1 year and then construction fees in the following year. So that way we can continually be ahead of the game in terms of getting those roofing projects done. And in terms of the roofing program, I think that initiative was about $1.3 billion to replace around 947. The first tranche of all of those roofs has been completed. The second tranche, all of those roofs are completed except one that is in construction. It's one of the larger of those developments. The third tranche, we're in and moving those forward in terms of putting those out to bid, in terms of the design. And then, as I mentioned, OMB is allowing us to move forward with the design so that way we can be ahead to put the projects out to bid.
And this is Eva Trimble, Executive Vice President for Strategy and Innovation. I also want to add that, and Stephen, you should mention specifically the status of the St. Mary's project that was raised earlier, since that roof is in progress as well. We recognize that it's severely in need of construction, and so that St. Mary's Park Houses project is proceeding We expect construction to start in November of 2022. We're waiting controller approval right now on A&E, and so things are moving to finally bring a new roof over to St. Mary's Park. But I want to add, Chair, to your question about delays. I want to say that the capital funding that's tied to the agreement, it's not stuck in any bureaucratic process delays. There's nothing specific there. It was really about a planning process to think about the significant amount of capital that we received, that we've really never received a level of funding like this before, and we needed to scale up to prepare to spend it. And I want to set expectations that spending will continue to scale up, but maybe not at the speed that you see with a typical other types of infrastructure construction projects from other agencies, because NYCHA does have very different issues to deal with when we're talking about occupied rehab. You heard about stakeholder engagement as a key part of what we want to do. We've heard from residents that they want to stay in the capital project development. And so we are looking to engage residents in that capital planning process. And that takes time, but that's not actual capital spending. But it's an important part of our capital project. And that's why we don't look necessarily directly at spending as a metric of how we're doing. We look at our planning process, our engagement process, and other factors.
Okay, Eva, I appreciate that, Eva. And I just want to just put a pin right there. And just let my chair, my co-chair know that whenever you want to jump in, you totally can, because I already know that we've had private conversations about this, Chair Rosenthal, and so you can definitely jump in. But the reason why I mentioned, can you give us an example, is because I really wanted to get a sense of what went wrong before. Give us an example of the work that you're doing with OMB so that you don't have those same challenges. You can move forward with spending. And if you're saying it's not necessarily about spending, it's about having a conversation, I need to understand what that means, because when we're looking at a commitment plan and a spend rate of 61% for the entire city, but we're looking at NYCHA with a 6.4%, that's a significant difference. And I'm trying to understand that. And that's why I asked for an example. And when Dana Eldon spoke about the 6 roofs, I was hoping that you would be able to, because we talked about it, to kind of put it in the realistic terms so that we can all have a visual right now. So that's why I asked for that specific example. And if you can't do that, I was hoping that you can just look at a different project and explain that. Because we're going to be here. We have a whole bunch of other questions related to specific spending, but I was hoping to get start this discussion with an example.
Well, and I was trying to, thank you. The example that I have is that we've been working with OMB, so that way we could front those tranches with design fees, right? And then thus, when we go to construction, we're that much further rather than a cold start when those fundings come to us directly. So usually
what's really confusing about that is that always was possible. What's changed? You could have always, 5 years ago, you could have done the same thing where you plan a year ahead and go to OMB. What magic has changed now? And I asked because when Chair Ampry Samuel asked this question before, I did not understand one word of the answer, and it is genuinely gobbledygook to me. What I see is a historic situation, all the years that you've had to do this right, all the years that you've gotten, maybe $1 million is different than 200 million. But even when you got $1 million from the city, you didn't spend it. Oh, I should be saying billions, right? My bad. It wasn't spent. So what is it about the, I guess, federal monitor who came in that has changed this so significantly? And the only answer I can come up with, and I'm eager to hear from you, is that you need more staff to meet demand, right? We're a big city. So in a way, you should try to not listen to dollar amounts. They're all going to sound big, right? We're just a big city. I mean, you know, one should think about it. Okay, let's say we were a smaller city, we would get less money, right? So the quantity sort of doesn't matter. The question is, why can't you execute? And why couldn't you execute 5 years ago? And the only answer I can think of is because you don't have enough staff. And if that's the answer, then I'm curious why you don't, given that the staff in this division is paid for, right? Through bonding, right? So, and I know that in 2018, someone pointed this out to NYCHA, and I know that starting in 2018, you indeed started bonding for these costs, which is great. Sorry you didn't do it earlier. I don't even know how to grapple with that. But given the fact that you now know you can, why not just hire twice as many people? You know what the process is. You know it takes a long time. This is not rocket science. I really would ask you to endeavor to explain what's changed with the monitor that has made some sort of difference. So magically, a year from now, there won't be a hearing like this because you've spent 100% of your city money. I don't understand. I really don't understand your answer. Yeah, so far. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And I'm sorry if my answer or Stephen's answer wasn't clear, but I can't say what we were doing wrong 5 years ago. I can say that we take responsibility for slow spending on our capital plan. However, we have been focused now on how we change that and how we accelerate spending, but also how we best plan for our capital program. And a lot of the focus of capital is about long-term planning. How do we choose our projects that we're going to invest in, and where do we invest? I do think one of the advantages of the HUD agreement was that focus on the pillar areas, heat and elevators, lead and mold, and that provided us some focus to say, how do we use our capital specifically to address those deficiencies in those areas?
I guess what I'm saying is, that's your job.
Yes, and we're saying we are doing it now, I think, better than we have ever done before, and are prepared to spend the largest capital program we have ever had here at NYCHA.
You know what? So with that being said, right? Let's jump into that, right? According to your website, the Capital Projects Division is responsible for over $1 billion in construction projects funded by the federal, state, and city investments. Can you describe in detail CPD's role in managing the funds received across the 3 levels of government? I think if you could start to outline that, it'll help us to further the conversation.
Yes, thank you. So Capital Projects Division, CPD, is responsible for the planning and implementation of the capital construction projects undertaken by NYCHA across all sources of funding. And this starts out with the planning in the anticipation of the funds that are going to get received, as well as the comprehensive physical needs assessment process to really support data-driven decision-making, and then the dialogues that happen in order to build out a 5-year capital plan. Once the funds are received and then allocated to CPD, the project's planning begins, in which staff are assigned and schedules are developed and the project is outlined. Typically, CPD's engagement with numerous stakeholders begins at that moment in time.
Okay, all right. for the people in the back, you have the physical needs assessment, right? And that's what that's what you need across the board. And then you get funding based on what's listed in the physical needs assessment, right? And when you get funding, is the funding attached to a certain part of the physical needs assessment? Or is it just you receive money into NYCHA CPD based on the physical needs assessment, and then you then determine who does what? So I'm just trying to get a picture of that.
So
Simple,
we
this
use,
is what you can say it.
yep, it depends on the type of funding source. The city funded sources are allocated. So they come to us as a scoped project and a project. So, you know, we appreciate all of the discretionary funds from the council members and the borough presidents. Those come in as a specific project to us through the city system. And then there are the mayoral pieces, which a lot of them are allocated directly to something, a roof, a heating plant at a particular development. Many of those lists are generated based on the physical needs of that plant, right? So there's a laundry list of levels of heating plants, roofs, 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, and those funds are allocated. State funds, we work with the state in order to address certain pipelines that they've allocated to us, and those again are allocated at a particular development and a particular funding source. And then the federal five-year capital plan, we use in order to leverage some of those pieces. Right now, 90% of that federal plan is dedicated to areas within the pillar. So the heating plants, additional funding to the roofs, that federal dollars are also helped to support some of the city projects in which have capital eligibility issues, where we support those as well. I hope that answered your question in terms of city and state are allocated to a particular development and a particular unit, and federal, a 5-year capital plan is developed out.
So is CPD able to match funding with projects that will make the most efficient use of the funds?
Yeah.
That, or because I know you mentioned like specific.
Yep.
Right.
And we leverage funds all the time to make projects whole.
How?
So I'll give an example of the City Plus heating plant program. So this was a generous gift in terms of the funds to come in and do city heating plants. Many of the items within a heating plant program are not capital eligible, like the temporary boilers. So we leverage federal dollars against those city dollars. So that way we can actually have a temporary boiler when we're putting in the heating plant, or remove electrical, some other items that are not capital eligible. At the same time period, we might leverage, in this case, we leveraged EPC funds to help with temperature sensors. So that way our heating plants are running at their optimum. We also used federal dollars where we had some steam distribution issues of the underground steam distributions. And so we were able to leverage some of the federal dollars to fix the steam underground distribution. So in whole, we tried to create a holistic project, not just from one funding source. The roofing is another good example of that. Most of the time that we're doing roofing, we want to take care of the brickwork as well, because we don't want to damage the asset of the roof while we're doing the local law 11 work. And so we will use some of the federal funds against the local ones, because facade work is not capital eligible. And so we'll do some of the local law 11 work with our federal dollars. So that way we can make sure that the asset of the roof and the brickwork are taken together. There's lots and lots of examples, but the capital is constantly leveraging funds in order to make complete projects.
You know, I understand what you're saying, and yes, there's complexity there. So, but it also, you can plan for it. So you can plan that you're going to use the city dollars in one way and the federal dollars in another way. And for the city dollars, simply start planning for that 6 months earlier or whatever, so everything can be in sync and done expeditiously, right?
I agree. In fact, just this last couple of years, we've looked at this portfolio as an all sources portfolio, and we are planning it out as one piece. Actually, we've done it more than the last 2 years. I'll just give an example on the discretionary funds. We got the list immediately for those discretionary funds for this year, and we immediately started to move on those in terms of writing task orders and getting those ready for their CP approval. So that way, when we receive the funds in November and we're able to move the projects forward, we already have the task orders written and that we're able to submit the CPs. And so we did that this year, and we're going to continue to do that. But yes, you're absolutely right, Chairwoman Rosenthal. We think about this holistically as an all sources budget, and then we leverage correctly. And then with the discretionary funds, where we only find out at that funding year, we're starting to get ahead of when the funds come in.
Right, and do keep in mind that I've allocated money over the last 8 years, as I'm sure is the case every other council member will say. And similarly, only, I think it was 6% of that money had ever been spent. And this year, when we looked at it together, we realized that we would not be able to spend a lot of it. So, and the cost on the one project that we're going to do has doubled. So, and that project had been put in the budget back in 2015. So it's a sad state of affairs. I guess the mayor's budget, when he allocates for something, it's pretty broad brush, right? So like 2.8 billion on one of the lines for building improvements over 10 years. So that's like a pretty fungible line item. Are you able to use that generality to plan ahead of time?
I can I'd like to pass it along to Anika, but in terms of the capital portfolio, when we talk about the mayor's funds, those are allocated. The action plan is the ones in which there was a dollar amount that we worked diligently with the monitors team and the city to identify the funds and put them into the different pillars to move those forward, and that's the agreement and the action plan. But let me pass it along to Anika on
the point of the action plan. Circling back to something I mentioned in my opener, the action plan calls for quarterly reporting with detailed, great detail. It's on page 20 if anyone wants to look at the action plan. Terrific detail about what's going on with each project. And again, the first report was due October 31st. And that report, in other words, not your usual quarterly report, but you're supposed to send to the monitor this report with great detail, which would shed light on what's going on here. That's the report that I have not seen. And so I don't know what's happening there at all.
So you're referring to the quarterly reports. All of those were submitted. And
nope, I'm referring.
No, I'm sorry. Submitted
report that was agreed on on May 15th, May 8th this year. It's the Federal Monitor approves NYCHA's City Capital Action Plan.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. The action plan is on the website. The quarterly reports, the reporting piece that you're speaking of is what they refer to, the monitors team refers to as the quarterly report. We have submitted those for both the GDA action plan as well as the city action plan.
It doesn't have the detail that's required on page 20.
So we're going to make sure that you have a copy of that.
I have it.
Um,
And so Brian sent it along, which I appreciate.
Okay, we work with the monitors team on that report and the format of the report, and we'd be happy to hear if there are other items that you would like. Again,
I just want what's on page 20. You've said that you would supply. I could start reading off the details, but suffice to say, they're just tracking details, a list of tracking details.
Yes, and right now, many of the projects in the capital action plan are at very early stages, so we don't have all of that information, but we are working with the monitor team to improve our reporting in that quarterly report. And as the projects develop, we will have more details to share. But right now, since many of them are at the very early stages, we didn't have all of those components just yet to include in the report.
Then why did you give yourself a due date of October 31st?
We said we would provide a report quarterly on where we're at, and we wanted to provide something, even if it doesn't have the full level of detail as described in the action plan.
to further explain, I think what Councilmember Rosenthal is saying is that there's a set of milestones in there, and there are milestones that we would not be hitting at this point in time, like construction completion, some of those milestones. So as the project commences, there are different milestones that we would input into that list, and those milestones that are further down the processes are identified, are not identified at this point in time because we wouldn't have gotten to those.
Again, it includes even, there is a milestone called forecast completion. And then the next milestone is delays. So of any of those projects, have they been delayed? Right? That could have been reported. Look, we don't have to go back and forth, but suffice to say, the public has no idea about why this money is not being spent.
And I want to just kind of put it into context for the public that don't know what we're talking about right now. The NYCHA submitted a city capital action plan, and it was approved by the federal monitor. And one of the requirements is for a quarterly report. And the previous discussion was related to the quarterly report that we just received a few minutes ago, and what it did not have based on what we thought it would have that was outlined in the action plan. I hope I explained that to those who were possibly confused. So I would encourage you to look at NYCHA's action plan, capital spending action plan, and then look at the monitor's report and NYCHA's report.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Ambrosino. Just one clarification. The capital planning team, the staff who works there, are you able to charge those costs off to debt service, to bonding?
So I'm going to pass this on to Anika to speak a little bit about the financial associated to the staffing costs.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. So the city provides financial support to pay for our capital project staff, many of the staff that work directly on projects, and that's actually done through community development block grant support. And so we are actively charging those staff costs where appropriate, and that helps us tremendously. So we appreciate that.
I'm so sorry, but I think I asked a bit, are you able, so if you're able to charge it to the bonding, then the cost gets woven into the debt service you pay every year.
Right, so we are not charging anything to the bonding. The city has given us a different pot of funding for our CPD staff, and we are charging that. So we are not charging anything to bonding currently.
Okay, and so that other pot of money comes from federal funding
Correct.
called CB something.
Yes.
And so have you explored the possibility? And I'm sorry, but I talked to the person who was in charge of finance yesterday, who said that he explored the possibility, and in fact, they had changed, NYCHA had changed. I mean, of course, use federal funds for anything, that's great. But if part of the problem is not having enough staff, because it's a really big number and you have to do a lot of planning, why not use the tool of charging off the additional staff?
So I'm happy to, I'm not sure who you spoke to, and if it was on the NYCHA side or the OMB side, but I'm happy to.
It was a NYCHA person who used to work at OMB.
Okay, so I'm happy to have that conversation with OMB and talk it through. But as mentioned, currently we charge all of our staff, most except for really like 4 or 5 people, to the federal pot, and that is provided to us by the city, and it has been very instrumental into helping us get this appropriate staffing.
Right.
I'm happy to look into that.
If you had more staffing funded by whoever, would projects move along faster?
Steve, do you want to talk to that?
I don't know if I would say that the projects would move along faster, but as more money comes available, it would assist us with building out and moving projects. More invoices, more project managers, more architects and engineers. I will say that a few years ago, we set up a program very similar to other agencies as we were reaching out to other agencies to discuss with them and see their programs and how they moved projects faster so we could learn from them. And one of the things that we built into our program was program managers, using models by other agencies as well as the Recovery and Resiliency Program. And so we've been able to forecast when we were looking at getting some of the funds and get those program managers on board that can assist us from everything from IT support, resident engagement, all the way through project management, architecture and engineering and consultants.
So given that the amount of money that you have to spend has increased tremendously, has OMB allotted you more staffing, money for staffing the capital planning team?
We haven't been allocated more money for staffing.
So quick question, and then I know I want to, we have some colleagues that have the hand raised for quite some time now, and I feel bad that Councilmember Chin dropped off. So it's not about the staffing. It's about the approval of the projects themselves and the planning of the projects, which causes the delay or causes a delay in projects being completed or the quote unquote spending for the project. So it's not a staffing issue, it's a process issue.
So again, obviously, I'm going to concede. I'm going to concede that yes, obviously, additional staffing across the board would always help, right? We have thought about this in terms of where we want to be in terms of our obligations and expenditures, and we're hiring up through our program managers, which was the armature that we have. And then I think we've had these conversations many times on, capital does an amazing job of obligations and expenditures on the federal dollars. We took this period of time and worked with the monitor to really think about where we need to spend the funds that we received. We wanted to be good stewards, and through that, we created the action plan. And now that the action plan was approved, we're able to immediately start to draw down those funds and get those projects moving forward. Those 3 years of funding, again, $750 million, it's more than $500 million sat on our books, and we weren't able to to move those projects forward, and that's going to hurt your obligations and expenditures rate. We're constantly working with our partners in order to expedite and speed up the processes, and in ways that we can do that to move our capital pipeline a little bit faster. Federal and state, as you know, we don't have all of the requirements associated to it as the city bonded money does, and that tends to add a little bit more time to the processes. I'm not saying it's a bad process, but it adds more time. And if we look at complete city funds, we're looking at about 6 to 8 months in the design phase to hire an architect or engineer on board, and then in the procurement phase. So the pre-design stays about the same, the design stays about the same, we put it out to bid, that's the same, and the construction durations are the same on federal, state, and city. But through city processes, we add about 6 to 8 months for approvals to get those contracts through. And if you have to do that twice, that adds a year into the overall process of the program.
Which is why you start a year earlier for the city money, right?
And
We
so-
already know that. And let's be clear, the federal money, I mean, these past 2 years, and we can pass it off to COVID, these past 2 years in terms of your obligations and spending since 2018 have tanked. Even with federal money, you're at obligated, I think 37% of the funds that have been allocated by the federal government. That's the easy money to spend. And 22% you've actually spent. So this is, I mean, the city percentage is, negligible, and that's a real problem. But I hope, I want to pass it along to my colleagues. I just don't understand how this has been allowed to happen.
I'm gonna stop right there. And Audrey, we'll turn it over to you because we have a lot more questions, but I want to be mindful of my colleagues.
Great, thank you. We will now turn to questions from other council members, beginning with Councilmember Grodenchik, followed by Councilmember Brooks Powers. And again, a reminder to council members to please use the Zoom raise hand function if you have any questions. And an additional reminder that the clock will be set to 5 minutes in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Starting time.
Thank you, Madam Chairs, and thank you for holding this most important hearing on NYCHA spending. And I don't have any NYCHA properties in my district in Eastern Queens, but I am an alum of NYCHA. I grew up in Pominock houses, which were very, very well run. Complaints were answered almost overnight, and no exaggeration there. When the steam pipe in front of my building split open and was belching steam, it wasn't fixed overnight, but I kind of remember within a month or two, NYCHA came in and ripped up the ground and replaced the pipe, which at that point, I guess, was about 20-something years old, and things do fail. Having listened to this hearing since it began and listening to the questions of my chair, Helen Rosenthal, and Chair Ampry Samuel, I can tell you that I really don't have much confidence in what I've been hearing, and I'm sorry to hear that, because there was a time when the New York City Housing Authority was the be-all and end-all of public housing authorities across the nation. And I would like somebody, and I don't care who it is, to tell me how you are going to deal with this influx of federal dollars that is going to be coming our way. Our senators, led by Senate Majority Leader Schumer, our congressional delegation has worked very hard, and for the first time in a very long time, public funding is going to be flowing to NYCHA. And the testimony that I heard from the residents at the beginning of this hearing was heart-wrenching, and I don't know what else to say. When Chair Alika Sample, her first hearing was almost 4 years ago. And at that time, we were talking about massive failures of heating plants across the city of New York during a bitterly cold winter. So I'd like to hear from somebody what is going to be different going forward, because I don't really think that the two chairs who have asked questions today have really gotten their appropriate level of response from NYCHA. And I know you go to work every day, and I know you're trying, but I don't know what it's going to take to give me the confidence. I'm leaving office at the end of this year, but I'd like to think that we left the city in a better place than we found it. And I don't believe that's going to be the case for the 400,000 plus NYCHA residents, which make up over 5% of the city population. So I'd love to hear from anybody.
Councilmember, thank you so much for that question, and I really do appreciate it. I think, with all due respect, I think, you know, the time that you grew up in Pomona Houses, which was always known as the crown jewel of NYCHA.
I just want to say something, Mr. Honan. I have spoken. It was considered an excellent place to live and grow up. But I've spoken to my colleague, Danique Miller, who grew up in the pink houses. He had a similar experience. And I have spoken to people who grew up in NYCHA residences all across New York City in the 50s and the 60s. And their experience generally was very, very similar to what I had, that matters were taken care of. And I just don't know what has happened over the last 40 years or so that slowly, this is.
Yep.
If this was
I'm sorry,
landlord we were talking about,
I didn't mean to imply that Pomona was different. I just
I
wanted
understand
to,
that. I get
you
that,
know,
but I
because
just want to put that on the record.
Pomona was just no different, because if you speak to Ms. Torres in Smith Houses, she will tell you that years ago Smith Houses was much better. If you speak to Ms. Eldon at St. Mary's, she will tell you that St. Mary's was run a lot better. If it worked at one time, it can work again. However, the biggest difference is more than a generation, and I would even dare to say maybe 2 generations of federal disinvestment, both on the operating side and on the capital side. This is not unique to NYCHA. If you talk to housing authorities in Philadelphia, if you talk to housing authorities in Chicago, if you talk to housing authorities in Los Angeles, they will tell you that they face the same struggle. Their answer to this problem was demolition.
I understand that.
In New York City,
Very sad.
in New York City, we have done our best to keep public housing going, but it is really, this is an example of governments, they call this phrase starving the beast. And so they starve us, and they give us half a dinner, and they say, why are you still hungry? Well, for years, we've gotten half the dinner.
Right.
And
With
yes,
all due respect, Mr. Honan, and I have so enjoyed working with you over these 8 years. You've really been incredibly responsive when I call you. With all due respect, you can say that they've only given us half a dinner, but you haven't spent that half. You haven't eaten that half. And you're saying that you're hungry, but you haven't eaten that half. And so if you can't spend the money you're given, I don't know how to process you need a lot more. Of course you need a lot more, but why don't you spend what you have? And that's the point of this hearing.
Yep. And Councilmember, I think I would agree. I would think almost all of NYCHA problems are 2-pronged, right? Start with the spending, start with the fact that we are definitely underfunded for years. But then we do have a management problem, and we have for years, and we acknowledged it in the federal agreement that we were forced to sign with HUD, the Southern District, the City of New York. That was not just that was an admission that we have a problem both ways. We now at NYCHA have folks who have admitted to the problem and are working on a transformation plan to change the way not only that we're managed in all areas of government. And Eva is leading that effort. Eva, maybe you can talk a little bit about how things are going to get different, how we're going to rate the ship.
Thank you, Brian. And yes, the transformation plan, which is on our website, if you haven't yet looked at it, it was released in March 2021. It shows our plan to change our management and operations. It proposes an entirely new business model for NYCHA operations. It's not going to replace the fact that we still need 40 billion, but our goal is that if we say we're going to show up to fix the problem in your wall, we'll show up to fix the problem in your wall. The underlying cause, the broken pipe, it may still continue to leak, and we may have to come back a month later to refix that wall. But the goal of the transformation plan is an entirely new business model that improves our response time to our residents, especially around work orders, cleanliness of buildings and grounds, really the core operational needs. And the focus of the HUD agreement and the 6 pillars, it shows that it's given us this focus to improve those areas. So you mentioned heating. Our heating response time over the last few years has dramatically improved, less outages and less length of the outages. And so we are starting to turn that management around, but without the additional capital. And for many years, we were eating our entire plate of federal funds. As Steve has mentioned, the city funds have grown substantially over the most recent years, but for many, many years, our capital program was almost entirely federally based. And we did meet all of those federal requirements on spending guidelines. So we have done our best, but when a building doesn't receive capitalization, when it's the same boiler, same pipes that you grew up with 40 years ago, there's very little we can do to substantially change the living conditions for our residents.
Just jumping in real quick, I heard Brian say that there was a management problem, and then Eva, you talked about, and then Brian also mentioned the transformation plan. Then Eva jumped in with the transformation plan. Can you talk specifically about the change in management real quick? Like what changes were made in like knowing that there's a management problem, sign the federal agreement that there's a management problem. Explain to me what changes were made with management.
Thank you, chairs.
So starting with our chair Russ was brought in. He has more federal public housing experience than any previous chair. And working with him, we have restructured the management of our property management operations. So we instituted something called the neighborhood model, which reassigns our properties into smaller management clusters called neighborhoods. And this allows management to have eyes on the ground and really see what's going on with our properties at all time. Our property managers need a lot of support and a lot of help. The conditions in our building are such that they're constantly putting out fires, they're constantly responding to problems, and they need support. And we want to better connect the properties with central office so that there's the same sense of urgency that people at the workers at our properties feel, that our central office has to feel as well. So everything at NYCHA is being redesigned around these neighborhoods to provide our property managers support in serving our residents. So we now have 30 neighborhoods to serve our residents.
What changes were made in management to spend the money? So within central office, what changes were made to expedite procurement?
We brought on a chief procurement officer. I think he started about a year ago, and he has completely streamlined our procurement policies. We instituted a new procurement policies manual last year. He is also engaging with the supply chain in a whole new way. So we've been meeting with the New York Building Congress. We understand that our capital program specifically is resource intensive. The amount of boilers, the amount of elevators that we're going to need requires us to reach out to that supply chain in a whole new way. So we have a new chief procurement officer that's dealing with those big supply chain and capital issues, but down to the micro purchase issue as well. We have a new purchasing and logistics department that's focused on helping property managers quickly access the contracts they need to respond when conditions at the sites demand, whether it's a stoppage and they need plumbers, whether they need tree removal after a storm.
Thank you for that, and apologies for the motorcycle outside my office door. But do you have documentation of that? Because the documentation we're looking at shows a decrease in spending of federal, state, and city money. So what you're saying really sounds rosy. Do you have any document that can show that? What is your new streamlined procurement mechanism? You know, and you can send those over. I'm not expecting you to rattle it off the top of your head.
I will talk to the team and see what we can share, but
the disconnect between what you're saying and what I'm seeing in my deteriorating developments is large.
yeah, I'm not sure what you're seeing, but we are spending faster than we can get from the federal government. We are spending every dollar we get to
Right.
try to improve our property.
I look forward to seeing that documentation.
Audrey?
Great, thank you. We will now continue with questions from Councilmember Brooks Powers, followed by Councilmember Salamanca. And before we proceed, I would just like to make a quick announcement to the residents and other members of the public who have joined us today. We thank you very much for taking the time to come and present before the committees. And we thank you also for your patience. For those who haven't yet had a chance to speak, we will hear from all of you as soon as the committee members conclude their questions with the administration. Councilmember Brooks Powers.
Starting time.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to both Chairs Rosenthal and Anthony Samuels for convening this much needed and timely hearing today. Thank you to the members of the administration who come to provide testimony today. As a member of the Capital Subcommittee and as a council member who represents 5 NYCHA developments and a RAD development in my district, it's a priority that we ensure that NYCHA is using its capital dollars responsibly. So I look forward to hearing about how the department is working to improve long-term quality of life conditions for the residents of our city's public housing. The main concern I would like to address today is how NYCHA is using capital funding to maintain the central services of its building stock. Particularly as one of the residents earlier mentioned, the weather is getting colder and it's especially critical that NYCHA keep its facility heating equipment functioning so that our public housing residents are not left susceptible to electrical outages or cold apartments. In recent weeks, as the weather has gotten colder, my office has received reports of inactive or malfunctioning heating systems in multiple NYCHA facilities. In that light, I wanted to ask NYCHA representatives some questions, but before I go there, I also want to take a moment to read an email I received in my office from a Redfern resident that is requesting attention to their matter. And I won't read the whole thing in interest of time, but it says tickets are open and closed. NYCHA no longer has the responsibility and National Grid doesn't care. There are no trained workers on site. ESD is attempting to resolve residents' total discomfort. 88-year-old seniors are on oxygen, defibrillators, and have asthma, calling in desperate need of help. So now I go to the questions. How many complaints has NYCHA received regarding malfunctioning heat systems, malfunctioning elevators? How has NYCHA been following up to ensure that building systems are functional and outages are kept to a minimum? Under the HUD agreement, NYCHA must replace 297 boilers by the end of 2026. Can NYCHA provide a list of all developments citywide that currently do not have permanent boilers installed? How is NYCHA prioritizing facilities for replacement and identifying buildings whose residents have the highest need? And in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, NYCHA received funding for infrastructure improvements and repairs. How has that funding been used in the years since to protect NYCHA developments from future storm damage? And just to be a bit specific, to represent my district on these questions also, the boiler question, Brian, as you know, we communicated all through the weekend because I had residents in Redfern with absolutely no heat. And then in terms of the infrastructure, Oceanside Houses has a lot of concerns, as well as Beach 41st and Redfern, in terms of commitments that have been made to NYCHA, to those developments in terms of the Superstorm Sandy monies that NYCHA received and the repairs that have not happened as it pertains to their elevators and their heating system. So I'd like to hear responses from NYCHA on this. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for that. I can start and then hand it off where my colleagues can jump in. I wanted to start with your heating issues. The HUD agreement sets requirements for how we respond to heat complaints, and in anticipation of heat season and in order to get ahead of those performance metrics, the NYCHA heat team does tremendous preventative maintenance. We go through all of our heating plants and we do check-throughs of all the boilers. We look for parts. We start stocking the parts that we know fail, like coils and other things in our heating plants that we know we want to have at the ready at our most distressed sites. We also instituted a few years ago a new heat desk that's stationed in Long Island City that tracks all the heat complaints coming in, so we can faster respond just by seeing increases in complaints. We dispatch our heat teams right away. We also have building sensors in many properties now that start to show when temperatures are falling, as well as certain alarms on boilers when we can start to predict that things are failing on the heating plant prior to even getting complaints. So we've really changed the way we're using data better to respond to heating complaints. If you're having specific heating outages, definitely, we can coordinate with Brian to follow up on those constituent issues. We also report all of our outage information on our website, and you can see all of the current heating outages, water outages, everything is transparent on our website as we're experiencing them. I can hand it off to Steve to talk about some of the replacement schedules that I think you mentioned. And there was a lot in your question. So if I missed something, please let me know.
Okay, and before we pass the question over to your colleague, when you say that you're using data better, I would imagine that if you're seeing it ahead of time, that we wouldn't necessarily get as many complaints as we're getting in terms of the lack of heat. So is this something that has been implemented throughout all of the developments? Is it a pilot program? Because
it's throughout all the developments, and we still want the complaints. That information is really important to us. We encourage residents that are facing any type of complaint in their issue to put in that work ticket so that we know about it and we can follow up on it. We don't see work tickets as a bad thing. It gives us feedback on our buildings and what our residents are experiencing. So, if everyone in the building is calling in the heat complaint, that's fine. And that gives us information to work off of.
I'll take the next set of questions, and these are in regards to the FEMA funded projects. You do have 5 projects, I believe, in your district. All of them are in construction as we are working on different scopes of generators, heating plants as part of the FEMA fund.
Can you identify which ones so that I'm on the same page as you when you say there are 5 in my district?
Yep. So you have Redfern, which is estimated to be completed in 2022, quarter 2. You have Beach 41, that's in construction as well. And that should be ending its construction in quarter 1 of 2022. Ocean Bay or Oceanside, that construction had started and it's anticipated to be completed in quarter 4 of 2021. Carlton Manor is also in construction, and that's estimated to be completed in quarter 2 of 22, as well as Hamel, which is estimated to be completed in quarter 2 of 2023. And I also want to thank you very much for the funds that you've provided us at Redfern and Carlton Manor. Both of those projects, the playground and the basketball renovations, are in construction as well. And I thank you for your support.
Steve, can you briefly describe the work that's being done in each of those developments, or at least
Thank you,
we can
Brian.
send, yeah, at least we can send the council member a list. But if you could just briefly go into it, and then we can, and then I think we should set up something with the TA leaders and the council member, so this way we're clear on all the work that needs to be done. We can set that up quickly.
Yeah, I in the matter of time, I think if what we can do is we'll set up a meeting and we'll go through all of the scope of the work for all of those developments with you, as well as the residents.
Can you just give me high level to let me know if it's pertaining to the elevators, as indicated?
The heating plan.
Wait, just hold on for a second. When Councilmember Brooks asked the question and then you answered, I had my mic off and I was saying, I wish he would just give us some details. There's only 5 developments. And then Brian, you jumped in and asked them to give the examples. So I appreciate that, because this would help us, right? Because just listing the projects and when they're going to be completed, I can read that on the paper, just to get a sense of what you're doing in a timeline is why we're having this hearing. So,
Chair, I've worked with you there for a little while, so I know what you're looking for.
So Redfern,
you read my lips.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So Redfern, we are putting in a heating plant there. It is above grade as part of that program, and there is some generators associated to that. You have Ocean Bay, Oceanside, where we've completed with the above grade heating plant at that particular development. There was some heating elements associated to the hot water program to that. Carlton Manor was also above grade heating plant, and that is in construction, as well as Hamel has an above grade heating plant. And those are the construction projects where we are fully building out a new heating plant. Those are all steam programs. And then we've decoupled in terms of we are heating up the hot water through steam from those boiler plants.
So no elevators are listed in any of those capital projects?
There's a number of other pieces, elevators in particular ones, but there's the lighting and the site plans. In terms of elevators, there are no elevators as part of the Recovery and Resiliency Program at those developments.
So there was a commitment from NYCHA on elevators to Redfern and Beach 41st houses. So I'd like to know how that fell off the table and how could a commitment made be changed?
I will look into those particular ones and we will get back to you, and we'll work out to make sure that the elevators are, that we have it in our pipeline.
And one last thing, and chairs, I appreciate the time that you're providing to me. But in terms of the complaints that we've been receiving in terms of the malfunctioning heating systems and elevators, I request that NYCHA provide in writing to the committee members a full reporting on how many of these are in bad shape in terms of the reports of the outages, so that we have a good line of sight on that. Also, again, Redfern continues to be without heat, and as you all are working towards this construction, I need to know, NYCHA has, as I'm hearing today, money that's not even being spent. Like, what is NYCHA doing to address it on the short term, and then long term? We understand, but on the short term, to make sure that we are providing New Yorkers with the heat that they need. We should not have seniors and families without heat. Like, when we go to sleep at night, we are blessed and fortunate to have what I hope is a place with heat. And I have hundreds of residents that for several days when it was extremely cold, and we are on a peninsula. So when it's cold in New York City, we're about 10 degrees less than y'all. And they are cold. And, you know, NYCHA is not doing what they need to do to ensure that they have proper heating.
So Councilmember, it was you know, all weekend long. I know we were in communication on the heating issue at Redfern, and we have had staff there today. There was a part that was that's missing. It's a fairly new system too at Redfern, too. So it was unusual. It did require a partnership with National Grid. So you're, as always, the residents know what's going on, but that problem should be, you know, we should be seeing improvement at Redfern by, you know, by the end of this week, and we'll continue to monitor. And please, as always, whether it's 11 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock in the morning, you could always reach out to me, and I will make sure that the heating team knows in real time. And so, and we can get you the number of, you know, outages so far in your developments for this heating season. And if the chair wants that for all committee members, we can do that too as well.
Thank you so much, Brian. And this evening we have a tenants meeting with Redfern. If you or someone from NYCHA is available to join us at 6 p.m., you are more than welcome, because I'm going to have to respond for NYCHA, and I would love it if NYCHA can respond for NYCHA. And thank you so much, chairs, for the time.
Great, thanks very much. We will now take questions from Councilmember Salamanca, followed by Councilmember Adams.
Clock is ready.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this important hearing on capital. I just have a very basic question to the capital team here at NYCHA. In 2017, my office allocated about $3 million capital dollars for security upgrades to Melrose houses. That work has still not gotten done. Can you please give me an update as to what's happening with that funding that I gave you in fiscal year 2017?
Thank you, Councilmember Salamanca. So the 3.4 for CTV upgrades at Melrose, that was we received that in fiscal year 2019. And that was procured. There is a contractor that has been procured. It is now going to OMB. That's a CMA JOC, and it should go into construction as soon as we have controller registration for that contract.
Let's go back. That funding was given to you in fiscal year 17. You're saying fiscal year 19. So did you get to it in fiscal year 19? Because it was not 19, it was fiscal year 17.
I'm going by the city FMS system, and the FMS system identified that fiscal came from 2019. It's mayoral commitments. It's for $3,442,000, and those are the CCTV upgrades at Melrose. But again, I think that is irrelevant. We need to get the CCTV to the residents, and we've hired a contractor. That is going through the OMB comptroller process. And as soon as we have a contract registration on that, we will start installing cameras.
When was it sent to the comptroller's office?
We just got the contractor. That package is getting put together. It will go to the comptroller's office or OMB. It'll go to OMB first. It has to go to the CP process first. And once we get a CP, then we can go to the comptroller's office.
How long is that process going to take?
It depends. We average out. We hope that that's a 30-day to 60-day turnaround. But we recognize with our partners that there is a lot of work. And right now it's been taking 6 to 8 months.
This is why, and I'm going to say this on a record, while I'm staying in office, while I'm still the council member, I will never allocate funding to NYCHA. It is a waste of time. You know, to be able to give you funding, and that funding was allocated in fiscal year 17. I understand you're saying your records say fiscal year 19, but it was in fiscal year 17. You know, for this the entirety of the time. This money has been sitting on your lap, and you have done nothing with this funding. And time in and time again, all I've heard was excuses. We've had many oversight hearings. I've asked about that money. You said, oh, you're going to get back to me. This is the first time that I hear you getting back to me on the record. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for this hearing. And so we can really call out the incompetency when it comes to capital dollars at NYCHA. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, can I actually just follow up on Councilmember Salamanca's question? So let's say he put some money in 17, let's say it was fully funded in 2019, whatever.
So this is actually 2019.
Why didn't the process start in 2019 then?
I can't speak to the 2019, but what I can speak to you is what we're doing right now.
Can anyone speak to why it didn't happen in 2019? And again, the reason I'm focusing is because I've now taken out $3 million from my NYCHA allocations because they're just nothing. I can't seem to allocate to anything that would actually finish. And so I'm now using the money to build a better lunchroom for the school next to the NYCHA development. And I feel that's a good use of the money, and it's going to be completed this year. It was sitting in my budget, your budget, for 8 years, right? 7, 6, 5, whatever it was. So I'm really curious if anyone has the answer to Councilmember Salamanca's question, what happened between 2019 and your sudden interest in putting through the CP to OMB? And I know the answer. The sudden interest is because, we want to get stuff done by the end of people's terms or the de Blasio administration. But does anyone know why it didn't get done for 2 years?
What I've done is a deep dive into our capital program, and we've put into place pieces in which funding, when we receive it, immediately goes into task orders, and we start moving it through the process. I don't want projects to sit in planning, and that's what we did with our FY22. Those projects immediately, as soon as we got the list, we went into putting in task orders. So that way, as soon as the funding gets released and we can submit CPs in November, we are doing that. We're also moving a lot of projects like the CCTV over to CMA and job order contract. So that way we can expedite those faster than putting them, basically taking out a design phase.
So the answer here is you're going to do better because you now have this task order process that you didn't have before, right? That's what you're saying?
I can't speak to the past.
You're going to do different. You're going to do something different.
But we're doing it different to make it better. So that way we never have these again.
So question, earlier we talked about OMB, right? The communications you've been having with OMB and how because of that, you were able to shorten the time frame of projects. So the conversations you had with OMB was Councilmember Salamanca's project included in that OMB conversation?
So we're constantly having conversations with OMB and trying to streamline the way in which we move our projects through the processes. Also with making sure that there's scoping and financing and the right information in the CPs. So that way there's no back and forth. We want to streamline this so that way it gets to them, they look at it, they can approve it and move forward. And that's the goal. And it's about a partnership. It's about a partnership with OMB. It's about a partnership with Comptroller. We were able to, with the Comptroller's assistance, move everything from electronic filing. That, I think, is really going to speed up the process by which we get our projects registered. And so those are those conversations that we have regularly.
You know,
why I mentioned that is because the first question that I asked, where I started out historically, NYCHA has had significantly lower city capital rate when compared to, that was my first question. And in that question, we asked specifically about your partnership and communication with OMB. And you responded by saying that you were doing something different with OMB, which is allowing for us to now see a different spend rate. And so that's why I was thinking that since you just spoke to Councilmember Salamanca about OMB, I was trying to, kind of bring us back to the first question to see if there's been a change, but.
No, I don't want you, OMB is not about our commitment rate. Our commitment rate is our commitment rate, right? It's our responsibility to get those allocated in commitment. And so the process that I was speaking for before was the right sizing of the portfolio. So that way, as we look at our percentages, you have a $250 million, you have $750 million that you can't access. You do that as a percentage off of your obligation and expenditure rate because you're not able to have that. It's just sitting there. That distorts that percentage rate. Now that we've right-sized our portfolio, as soon as we got those funds, as soon as we got that agreement and those funds were available to us, we started moving on those projects and then working with OMB to illustrate where we're going to project out for the entire year. So again, it's not OMB that's controlling our obligations and expenditures. That's us. That's me. But we're working with OMB so that way we can speed up processes.
Yeah, I guess I still don't understand the difference, and I still don't understand. Anyway, we should let Councilmember Adams speak, but this, and maybe we can just work offline, but I genuinely don't understand what has changed and why it couldn't change 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And maybe the question is, and I get back to this, you're under oath. My question to you is, do you need more staff to get the work done?
So we have a program set up that we can use program managers through our federal dollars to allow us to expand and contract staff as needed for those projects. And the tool that we're using is those program managers to staff up to get these projects executed.
Honestly, I don't understand what you
We can always use more staff. I mean, we can always use more staff, but if there's not, if there's not blood in the turnip to allow for funding to get us more staff, we're also looking at different ways in which we can make sure that we have enough staff to execute all of these projects.
Right, but you don't have enough staff to execute all these projects. It's not on you. It's not on anyone there, but you just don't, right? So again, apologies, Councilmember Adams. I see your hand's been up for a long time.
Clock is ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you both of my chairs for having this hearing today. It's so needed. I've been listening for a while, and I'm just going to preface this by saying that when I ran for city council in 2017, I promised my constituents at South Jamaica Houses that I would revamp the look for their senior center that's been out of commission for a very long time at the hands of this administration. Fast forward to a couple of months into office when I brought this project to NYCHA. NYCHA then handed me a $5 million bill and said, you do it yourself. Well, anybody that knows how city council is managed knows that that is our entire budget for our entire district. So that was an impossibility. So there I was with egg on my face, running on something that I thought was going to be a no-brainer because we care about our constituents at NYCHA. We care about the residents, and most importantly, we care about our seniors. But this was not the case. I am happy to say that I have been able to secure funding over $1 million with NYCHA to upgrade our community center for our children, partnering with Cornerstone, and that has gone very, very well. So I wanted to say all that as far as history was concerned, commiserate with my colleague, Councilmember Salamanca. This is such a difficult hill to climb with NYCHA, and also with my colleague, Councilmember Grodenchik. It's very painful to have these, to hear what is still going on to the most disenfranchised of our entire population. These are human beings, and the stories that I hear every day, they're just not treated as such. I have one question after all of that. At South Jamaica Houses, I have noticed that there is storage being used where children should be playing in their community center areas and certain community center. There is actual storage that is being there. There's refrigerators put in there. There are other things that I guess maintenance is holding on to move into apartments that need those appliances. Why would this ever be the case that we would take away space for our children and our seniors in our housing developments that they need so much, especially in the time of a pandemic? Why would these vital spaces be used for storage?
Remember, is that storage in the community center?
Yeah, it is a family. It's called the Family Center.
In the Family Center?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah, I
Brian.
apologize for not having the answer now, but I will make a commitment to get back to you tomorrow to find out exactly what's going on there and, work with leadership here to see if we can resolve that quickly. As far as funding the senior centers and community centers, we agree with you. The federal government, in going all the way back to the Bush administration, the second George Bush, stopped funding community and senior centers. So at that time, NYCHA tried its best to keep the community centers going with NYCHA staff. Eventually, it became too burdensome. And we, with DYCD and the city's help, we were able to have Cornerstone. But if you talk to, many of the long-term residents here years ago, they will tell you when NYCHA, was funded fully, with community centers, not only were the conditions better, but also the relationship was much better too. People tell me who, grew up was like that community center was not only where I went to summer camp, not only where I went to after school, but it was a place that felt like family and it was a lot different. It is a shame because
I hear the same stories, Brian. I hear the same stories of days gone by and how great the times were then. My issue, just like Barry's, just like, Councilmember Salamanca is, that we have gotten so far away from humanity when it comes to NYCHA and the residents of NYCHA. Again, these are human beings. And for me, all of the bureaucracy and red tape that this city puts them through is inexcusable and it's heartbreaking.
I wish when I go to developments, I wish I could say, different, but I just do think that public housing nationally has been neglected for way too long and the camel's back broke.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Adams. If there are no other council members who have questions at this time, we will turn back to the chairs for additional questions.
So I want to be able to, I'm going to go back to Councilmember Salamanca's question, but just for the record, dive into the discretionary city capital additions. The fiscal 2021 adopted budget added about 16.1 million in city capital funds for 51 discretionary projects citywide within NYCHA's city capital portfolio. In fiscal 2021, city council discretionary projects in NYCHA's portfolio received an average of about $315,000 in funding to address physical improvements at development citywide. How much of the 16.1 million in city capital funding has been committed? And of the 51 discretionary projects, how many of those projects are completed or expected to be completed in fiscal 2022? Because Stephen, you mentioned it a few times as you're working on projections with OMB. So if you can just kind of give us a sense overall.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you again for your support on the important projects. They contribute tremendous amounts to the quality of life. So of the 51, the 16.1 million, 11 million of that is in design. So 20 projects total are in design. One is actually completed and being closed out. And we're moving, there's about two or three that are being combined with borough president money as borough, so that there is one project. So those projects are actually in design. And so we've moved all of those, but none of them are obligated at this point in time. Because they're not obligated until they have a contract registration.
Okay, and so based on what we were just talking about, what's that timeline for some of them? Or can you give us an average timeline for getting to that next step?
Yep. So 5 of those are security projects, right? We can immediately move those into CMA and JOC, and that's what we've done. So those are getting CPs to immediately go out to the residents and security and the development staff to identify where those lighting pieces are. 9 of those are grounds. We're trying to move those also into a CMA and JOC contract so we can immediately go into design with the residents and skip the design program. 3 of those are.
Is that the 6-month skip or?
Yeah, that's we're trying to skip actually a CP process, right? Because we're going to go right into CMA and job order contract. So we get to skip the design CP phase. So we save time in that, as well as a project for design is anywhere from 6 to 9 months. We're being able to skip that because of the type of projects. There's, so those are immediately going. The community centers, those are all in CPs, and those are all over to OMB to start the design process on those. Those are CPs for design. And then there were 3 compactor projects. As I mentioned, we completed one of those projects. We've already moved that forward.
Chair Rosenthal. I try to take notes. You good?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we've asked a lot of questions, and I think my takeaway thought is that there's a November plan that the mayor is about to give to the city council to vote on. And I hope I see in there the necessary staff, additional staff that NYCHA needs for the capital plan team, because we're beyond a crisis. And the sooner we can get all these projects moved through and, the money spent, I think that would be a good idea. But Chair Ampry-Samuel, I admire your work with NYCHA month after month at these hearings. Thank you.
So I just want to get a couple of questions in for the record that I think would be helpful to my colleagues come January. As part of a budget agreement reached between the mayor and the city council, the fiscal 2021 adopted budget redirected approximately $537 million from NYPD's capital budget to NYCHA to expand broadband to the community centers. In total, $157 million is expected to be invested for broadband expansion in fiscal 2021. What is the current status of the broadband expansion initiative, and how much of the $157 million has been spent to date?
Thank you, Council Member. NYCHA is partnering with MOCTO to implement their RFP for broadband services, which includes reviewing respondents to the RFP workstream for the use of the city capital funding to expand broadband infrastructure. MOCTO is the lead agency and can provide more detailed information on the status of the project.
Okay, and even though they're the lead agency, they're going into
I'm sorry, what agency? MOCTO?
The Mayor's Office for Chief Technology Officer. Sorry for use of the acronym.
No, that's all right. So you're not in touch with them, so you don't know the
No, we are in touch. We are partnering, but they are the lead agency controlling the city capital funding. We are reviewing.
But I think the question was, given that you're in close contact with them, working with them, what's the timing on spending the money?
That's really a question for them to answer. The
Why?
way we partner with them is that there are respondents to the RFP, some that are using NYCHA and some that aren't. That RFP and that city capital is for citywide assets. So not every respondent to the RFP is proposing the use of NYCHA assets or to serve NYCHA residents. So when there is a respondent that includes NYCHA in their response, they have shared that with us and we are working closely with them to review those responses.
I mean, I don't feel the fire in your belly to get that done.
We've been working closely with MOCTO for over a year now, starting with the RFEI that they put out, I want to say June 2020, where we have 6 vendors on board right now installing broadband, each across 3 different developments. So we are instituting the biggest broadband program that NYCHA has ever been involved in through those 6 vendors in partnership with MOCTO. And we've been very committed to expanding broadband access. We've been sharing information about the federal EBB program to reduce broadband costs for our residents. And this is absolutely a priority for us.
But you don't know the timing from the Office of Technology?
Honestly, no, because I know there's a lot for them to review with the use of city capital funds. And it is an RFP process, so I don't want to step on their toes and make any problems for the RFP.
Sure. Should we give the Office of Technology more funding, personnel? Because of course it's a big project. We're a big city. Do they need more staff to get this done? Again,
I can't answer for them.
About students in NYCHA, kids in NYCHA, who never got to access their coursework when stuff was remote, when school was remote for 1.5 years. And I just want to feel the fire in your belly to fix it because these kids are so far behind.
Absolutely. There's tremendous fire in my belly. I promise you that when it comes to broadband. I spend a lot of my time on the broadband project, been very closely involved in monitoring all of our vendors and expanding that work. We've talked to all of the vendors to expand their portfolio, but right now, specific to your question, the RFP is within MOCTO and you should definitely follow up with them to find out what they need to expedite that work.
And so you're working with your current contractors to expand their breadth. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we have 6 vendors on board right now to install broadband in various developments. They each have about 3 developments underneath their license agreement right now.
So that's 18 in total. Got it.
And so we've been working with them. Most of them are just getting underway right now in the installation phase of that work. And once they have fully signed up the residents and are stabilized, we will begin talking to them about expanding to additional developments.
So none of them are up and going?
No, some of them are up and running. I don't have it all off the top of my head, but we've launched with a variety of the vendors. I can follow up. I can send you all of the vendors and their locations and what is running and what is still in the implementation phase.
How many more do you have to go?
18. How many more sites?
Yeah.
I want to say there's probably only 3 or 4 sites left that are still in the implementation phase, but I will follow up.
And after that, the ones that are not even in the beginning phases, how many?
I also want to add that all of our buildings right now are wired for either FiOS or Spectrum or both. What this additional service is bringing broadband vendors that we work with in partnership with MOCTO to provide low cost or free service for our residents.
Got it.
However, both
Verizon
and FiOS and Spectrum offer low cost programs.
Right. So how many more do you have to go after this 18?
We will work with the vendors to see what their capacity is and what they need to expand.
Do you have any plans?
We have told them all that once they have successfully achieved installation at their first 3 developments, we will work with them to expand their portfolio.
So I don't understand. What's the connection with the Mayor's Office of Technology and their?
So these 6 vendors came to us through an RFEI that was put out in June of 2020 with MOCTO and EDC as partners. And that's how these 6 vendors came to us. We also have, on top of that, the RFP that MOCTO is working on now for additional vendors to come on board.
And could you say that you have 5 in mind that you think should be the next 5 sites after this 18?
I don't. We have worked with MOCTA. They in the Internet Master Plan, they have maps of I can't remember exactly what it's called, but low take-up rates or low subscription rates for certain areas of the city that are that have limited broadband access. So we have looked at those maps as part of this process. However, some of these groups are using new types of technology that need to work off each other. So that there are these mesh networks that they need to kind of go from contiguous buildings. So some of it depends on the technology that the vendor is using and how they can expand into additional buildings.
Sounds complicated. Sounds like something that if you had enough staff, you could plan for, right? And know what the next set of buildings are. I mean, this is fundamentally what the problem was with capital spending, the lack of planning. And so I'm just wondering if you're doing the planning now on a project that you're working on. But Chair Ampry-Samuel, I'm sorry I interrupted you. It's sort of just screams of not planning again. And that's what got us in trouble with the lack of spending city money. So I just am trying to point out, here's an opportunity where you could plan something. And as soon as the RFP is ready, you know the sites that you could go to. Just an idea.
Well, with that, Chair Rosenthal, I'm gonna just ask the next question about fiscal 2021 adopted budget again. Fiscal 2021 adopted budget redirected $22 million in capital funds in fiscal 2021 from the NYPD to NYCHA for the renovation of 3 currently vacant community centers: Monroe Houses in the Bronx, Sheepshead Bay Houses in Brooklyn, and Wagner in Manhattan. Additionally, a 4th NYCHA community center located in Ocean Bay Houses will receive expense funding to support programming to be provided by DYCD. What's the current status of the community center renovations, and how much of the $22 million has been spent?
Thank you very much for the question. NYCHA has assigned all of these important projects to our program management to support. And we've already started the surveying of the existing conditions. And we've been going out to meetings with the center sponsors, tenant associations, and project managers to define the exact scope as we're building out those A&E services. And then we move into the design phase of getting those architects and engineers on board. The target date for construction start in the Sheepshead Bay is, the design for all of them, Sheepshead Bay, Monroe, and Wagner, is spring 2020. We hope to see that fall procurement in 2022, and then start of construction for those 3 in spring of 2023. Now, the Ocean Bay.
Hey, one more time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a mask on. So Sheepshead Bay, Monroe, and Wagner, the design should be going out, and it should be starting in spring of 2020. 2021, excuse me. 2021. The procurement of
we're in spring. We're in fall of 2021. Right? Mm-hmm. We done passed the spring. We passed the spring of 2020 and the spring of 2021.
I'm sorry. I'm reading my notes incorrectly. Sheepshead Bay, Monroe, and Wagner. The design is in the process of starting. We've already gone out to those sponsors as we're building out the scope of those projects, and design starts in this spring, which would be 2022. So I apologize. We then hope to get these out in the fall, as we're going to accelerate the design phase of that, as design is 6 to 9 months, and construction start is anticipated in 2023.
Okay, and how do you accelerate the design phase? One more time.
Yep. So we've been doing this recently successfully on a lot of our projects where we are pulling the designers together and they're building out standards so that way we can execute those design projects quicker. We want to do the stakeholder engagement and make sure that the sponsors and the Residents Association have the items in that scope that we can do. And then by simplifying the design, creating standards so that way the drawings are simplified. We meet with the Department of Buildings so that way they know of the pipeline that's coming and then they can be prepared for that. That's how we streamline that. And we've been doing that successfully on the heating plant pipeline. We did that successfully on the roofing program. And we've been recently successful in doing that on some of the design build and as we're building out the waste management program.
Okay, going back to Ms. Torres' comments during her testimony, at what point are you incorporating the residents?
So we started a standard procedure. As soon as we get the funding, we're reaching out to the sponsors, the elected officials, and the residents to inform them that we received the funding. We are writing right now into our program management software a way in which we can immediately send a letter out to all of those individuals so that way they know exactly when the funds hit our system. And then we continually, in terms of this program, this would be a stakeholder engagement where we're wanting the feedback regularly and working as a team to get through, to get the design that we want. Differently from, let's say, for instance, a roof, which would be completely focused on a spec that we have. The residents then are helping us make the determination on the scope. Through the design process, we're informing everyone when those designs are done and that they have a schedule. So that way we inform everyone when it's going out to procurement as well. Our funders.
The survey of the conditions. So you have the signed commitment, then you have the survey of conditions, and then you go on to define of the scope. So the survey of the conditions, is that like walking around the development and surveying?
Yeah, so what happens is we're trying to front these. So we're getting staff to go out, pull all the drawings, pull the work ticket reports, meet with the residents, meet with the sponsor, meet with the development staff, understand the existing conditions. So that way we can build a task order. So that way the designers don't have to spend too much time doing pre-design, trying to front that. So that way the designers have the scope of work that they have to do. And then we can continue to do stakeholder engagement for us to be able to, as we get through a design process, schematic design, design development, construction documents.
Okay, but the residents are a part of the surveying of the conditions process as well.
The surveying of the conditions is a lot about pulling the work order tickets, pulling the drawings. We're informing the residents of the funding, but they are not part of, they have not been part of the pulling of the work order tickets and pulling of the drawings. We start to, when we're going out to the development, we're setting up the meeting to have the dialogue with the residents and the development staff. That on these three projects has not started yet in terms of going to the site and meeting with the residents and the development staff.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to just keep rolling. You good, Chair Rosenthal?
Yeah, I have one more. I was going to ask the energy question, or are you going on to?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for helping us get back on track. Asking about the physical needs assessment and the energy audit. So the physical needs assessment is required to determine capital and management improvement needs. And these are required every 5 to 6 years. So for NYCHA's next physical needs assessment, how will coordination between an energy auditor and a P&A provider B, which is important for energy efficiency and capital upgrade decision-making? And what, if any, impact do you think it'll have on NYCHA's stabilization plan and pipeline?
Thank you, Chair Rosenthal. It's a great question. The physical needs assessment, we are currently going out in an RFP for the new physical needs assessment. We know that the last physical needs assessment was very robust in comparisons to the previous one. And so we're adding into this physical needs assessment more information in regards to building information science, building science, as well as those things like energy and how much energy that we're using. We have on call which is the IDIQ, energy consultants that we use regularly as we define out what the next heating pipeline will be, what the next electrical needs to be. And we now have that in a map that allows individuals to see kind of where we want to be in terms of our energy and electrification portfolio.
Okay, that's a perfect segue into the last two questions. And clearly I want to have a conversation about the Build Back Better plan, the Build Back Better bill, as well as where are you now with your blueprint for change. So with that, we know that you are, well, we don't know, but possibly you'll be receiving additional federal funding through the infrastructure legislation known as the Build Back Better bill, which is currently being considered. If enacted, how much is NYCHA, from what you've been hearing, expected to receive in capital funding? And how would such funding be allocated through the authority's portfolio? And will the increase in additional funding mean that city spending will be prioritized in a different way? And do you anticipate a deadline for those federal funds? And as you're answering that, I want you to then, start to just talk about the blueprint for change that you've been talking about for a very long time and where it is in the state legislature, and look at those plans versus what you would be receiving under the Build Back Better bill. And it reminds me of Marquise Jenkins. During his testimony, he mentioned, would there be a need for these conversions if you have this, infusion of funding and looking at your spend plan? And we've been joined by Councilmember Gibson.
So thank you so much. And this is really timely because there is rumors that the House may pass the Build Back Better bill tonight, their version. The Senate still does not have language in their version. So what we know is that public housing is right now a priority both in both houses, but we do not have the final dollar amount of what we are going to get. What I can tell you, though, that we are already planning, and that we are not only planning on our own, but we are also planning with the CCOB, and we have an agreement with them that, with the funding that we're going to get here, rather than the way NYCHA has traditionally spent money, where we've spent money on roofs, one development, spent money on boilers in another development, and spread the money around. We're going to look to do comprehensive modernization. That means we will go into a development and take care of, from the roof, inside people's apartments, take care of the plumbing, all the way down into we have of the boilers. The agreement with the CCOP goes as far as naming the priority developments that need the investment, and this is based on years of capital needs, the P&A, and also work order tickets that are associated with the developments. this is a historic agreement where tenants and NYCHA sat down for months to hammer this out, to have a plan. And so we are ready to go when that funding is received. As far as how this relates to the trust, I just want to say that the federal funding that we get, and we are really grateful to the delegation who has been a national leader here to make sure that public housing is not forgotten in Washington in the infrastructure bill. This is only capital dollars, right? So we have an issue both on the capital side and the expense side, right? The trust is a little bit different. The trust, would be able to, have money that we could spend on both capital and operating. So we will see improvements on the capital side, depending on how much money we get, but we will still have an operating issue that we'll have to deal with. Until we have a final dollar amount, that will also determine, next course on the trust. I do not want to make a commitment now because, I would never want to have a read my lips moment. But if we're able to, fund these developments, it's a very, totally with the, that would be a very different conversation than we were having earlier in the year when the trust was our only avenue to bring in capital and operating dollars. So the next few weeks should be interesting. We talk to leadership in both houses all the time, literally daily. And we are, we're ready to go also with a plan to spend these dollars.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't have any follow-up questions related to that. I want to make sure that my co-chair is okay. Okay. All right. So we'll be waiting, and clearly we'll have a conversation once that bill is passed and the money comes down. My final question is just for clarifications, because people talk about the federal monitor all the time. And so I just want, again, for clarification, what is the federal monitor's role based on your interaction when it comes to the spending of city capital dollars as it relates to the HUD agreement and the city capital action plan? So what's the federal monitor's actual role? And I ask that question because some people have that conversation around, should the federal monitor even be invited to city council hearings, and what would that look like? And so what is the federal monitor's role as it relates to?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. The federal monitor has a role in monitoring some portion of our city capital plan. It is not our entire city capital budget that is under their purview. It's very specific amounts detailed in the HUD agreement that are meant to be spent on the pillar areas in order to improve our performance in areas that were deemed deficient and non-compliant through the HUD agreement. Through that role, and what does it mean to really be a monitor? It means that we are required to submit the action plan to lay out collaboratively how we plan to spend that money. We have to provide those quarterly reports, but we have a very collaborative relationship with the monitor, through our work on the CAC. We have regular meetings with them to talk about our progress on the capital, to talk about ideas on how to improve capital efficiency. So we are working closely with them. They are looking at our spending, our planning, everything that goes into the capital projects that are under their purview of the agreement, and that's laid out in the city capital action plan.
Can I just ask on that? In that interaction, do they ever ask you to change things or clarify things? I mean, is it a dialogue, or is it, and what changes have you made? What have they asked you to make, and what have you made?
They have given us some helpful feedback in our planning process as we've, for example, as we've gone through design build for the first time. They've brought some expertise there. And so we work with them, really on a very regular basis as collaborators so they give us feedback on management decisions, on implementation of the projects. But it is a give and take. It is a debate. We don't take every idea that they give us. We have different of opinions on some things, but we work together on that.
Yep. Can you give one example of a management suggestion they made that you took?
Specifically on capital, like on the capital project implementation? Steve, I don't know if you have anything that comes to mind. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
Or any that you rejected? I mean, they give you management suggestions, like what?
Well, in terms of the capital portfolio, the majority of the relationships that we've been having are going through the projects, and we meet basically regularly. They have access to all of our systems, and so it's a dialogue that we are working through, everything from stakeholder engagement as well as, outreach to our vendors, and how some of the schedules are. A lot of those changes, we're working with them. It's kind of, and sometimes a connection. In terms of the design build RFP, as Eva had mentioned, they edited through all of those RFQs, RFPs, and there were a number of different things that we worked through in terms of making it a better RFQ and RFP.
Again, public money is being spent on the monitor. NYCHA is funded through public money. These answers are very general. I wish you could have said, yeah, they said we had, if you look at the process, there are 3 stages, and they said we have too many people at stage 1 and not enough at stage 2. And then you made that change. I'm making this up, right? I don't know what happens in these meetings. I don't know. I've never looked at, all your internal workings, but I wish you could give the public an example of what has come out of those hearings. But, I will also say we've belabored all of this so much, and I see the residents waiting to speak, and I appreciate them so much. It shouldn't have to be like pulling teeth like this. Just shouldn't have to be. Anyway.
Thank you, Chair Rosenthal. That completes my line of questioning for today for NYCHA. Again, we start off with residents who testified and kind of let us know what questions we should ask. And, I'll always try to bring it back to what a resident said to make it make sense and to have a visual. And so, clearly we're going to have to continue these conversations and just hoping that this allows for the incoming council members to get a sense of what's happening and the questions that they should be asking and continuing on this dialogue. So with that ends my questions for NYCHA. However, we have with us resident Maria Forbes, who came right at the tail end of the resident testimony earlier. And so I want to make sure that we go right back to the residents and making sure that we give time and you hear what Maria Forbes has to say and share as we did earlier before you leave. So I'll stop there and kick it back over to Audrey.
Great, thanks so much. As Chair Ampry-Samuel said, we will now be turning to testimony from the remaining members of the public. We thank you again for your patience. Please listen for your name. I will call you one by one and will periodically announce the person who is next. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer at 2 minutes and announce that you may begin. So we will begin with Maria Forbes, followed by Beverly McFarland.
Good evening to all. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Good evening to all. I would just like to say on the behalf of the citywide councilor president, Danny Barber, he yielded his time to me. That's why I came in so late. So I do ask that I be given or granted a little bit more time. And I'm asking that of both of the chairs at some point. My name is Maria Forbes. I'm a New York City Housing Authority Tenant Association president at a development called Claremont Consolidated. It's over 750 units here. I just became hired for New York City Housing Authority. My time hours are 4 hours a day, so there's no conflict of interest here. Myself and Danny Barber, the citywide chair, have been working very closely since July to discover the overwhelming, enormous bureaucracy that the Capitol Department has. In 2019, Danny Barber was able to bring up the elevator team, the roofing team, and the boiling team to Bronx South District. And we discussed the repairs of the developments, said to whatever extent that was going to be done. Unfortunately, that meeting was held in November and the pandemic hit us right in January. So which everything was brought to a halt. But in knowing where I'm at, I'm working at Morris Houses, but I want to start with Danny Barber's development, which is Jackson. He is in cold, the cold. He literally has a cold right now, and his family member who he is taking care of has a cold. So there's a lack of heating going on there. And if I can say that I'm at Morris Houses and that contractor started 2 years ago, and they will be there another 2 years, I'm more than sure that that is the same for Danny. And that is the same for the roofing contract for Morris and Jackson Houses, that it is just unbelievable that you have the roofers saying now that they have to kind of stop because they only have a certain amount of material and that they're running out of material. Madam Chair, you extended me the courtesy to finish on Danny Barber's time. And
Please do.
okay, so some contractors are saying because of the shortage of material and stuff, they cannot even begin to move forward. I want to say that in May, an emergency happened here at Claremont Consolidated in which a fire escape contracted was expedited, and the funding was moved forward from May and the contract started in September. So for this Capitol Department to say the bureaucracy in the controller's office to the bureaucracy anywhere else. I've been down to the United Nations and to learn in 2016 of the new urban agenda, which has 17 sustainable goals for human beings, and that they were there planning from 2016 to 2030. And that NYCHA still does not have anything together yet. It's still it's just uncalled for, because if they say they got one plan online that people should be reading and it was out since March 2021, the transitional plan to the capital action plan. You could plan for so much, but you're not planning enough for the residents. And I'll say that because if you go to these developments, Alika, it is inhumane and deplorable at Morris Houses. You have the contractors for the boiler and the roofers who have dug up the entire development, and the rats own the development. Let me just finish. The rats own the development. And I had requested a meeting when people came before me, and as well as Danny Barber, that I had to bring him, because how could NYCHA hire 10 subcontractors to the contractor, and it ran circles around the tenant association president who could not even begin to negotiate no services. And if you say that you're here for the residents, let's get to article section number 44, page 5 with section 3. These developers, contractors, whoever they may be, come into development and offer no economic development for the residents whatsoever. None. And Danny is having the problem that Miss Grady at Morris Houses is having. that no residence was hired for either of the contractors, let it be the roofers or the boiler contractor. But there are too many to have a contractor who's hired by NYCHA say to me, NYCHA inspectors didn't know what they was doing. That's why they hired me from outside anyway. But you have close to 10 subcontractors. $38 million at Morris Houses is being wasted. Because why? You take 10 people, give them 100,000, that's $1 million of the contract right there. Where did NYCHA sit down and scope out the work as to what they were supposed to be doing? And let me explain that, because I heard a lot out of a lot of people in saying residents was being displaced for the roof contractors. 16 residents had to be relocated on the weekend in the middle of COVID. Now, where were they going? On a Saturday and Sunday with no place to go. There was no courtesy location made for them whatsoever. But here people do shopping, cooking, cleaning, and arranging for themselves to be doing their weekend duties. And they said you have to turn that off. That they arranging to do weekend services for their own families, but a contractor is displacing them with no courtesy room, no nothing, unheard of until I got there to say, no, let me call the Department of Transportation, because if NYCHA scopes out these contracts and see what they're doing to the residents, the digging up of the property, all of this fencing, no garbage being collected. It is unbelievable that I had to negotiate with the Bronx Office of DOT to have the permit for it to be arranged on a weekday. Why? People go to work, go to school, ain't nobody home. But when you're taking families out of their household on the weekend to do all of what you want to do, that is inconsiderate. That is very inconsiderate. Let me just add on another couple of points that the Capitol Department has no consideration for. They don't even have no courtesy, professionalism, and respect. So let alone the human lives of people who've been suffering public housing for some time. I'm gonna just say this I contacted the NYCHA staff here, and they said they had been there and it looked like the garbage had been behind the fence for 2 years. So that's very inhumane and deplorable. So moving on, the money is being wasted under this capital situation. IG needs to be called in to investigate the investigators, because I don't see that the monitor done anything. From when that monitor came on, I stayed up several nights to bring myself from 1990 to 2018-19 when he got there until 4 a.m. writing him notes. Then you know what he told me? He said, we don't answer you. You'll get some information when I do my quarterly report. He needs an inspector to watch him, but inspectors need to be there to watch what is really going on, because all you hear is I'm a project manager. It's 7 project managers to 8 project managers on the boiler contract at Morris and at Jackson. You just can't make that up of a wasteful amount of dollars that are being spent. Somebody needs to oversee residents being removed from their home on the weekend. And I would have to end, because it is deplorable. The rats. So I was able to organize it, and I'll end with that. I was able to organize it somewhat. Call in all the 15 to 25 subcontractors. I don't know why the waste of money is being spent there with their project managers, like everybody was following somebody, and say, bring your exterminators to the table. All 3 exterminators need to come to the table. Then Reese need to come to the table. Everybody needs to give a weekly report as to what is being done at these developments. So now Danny has a cold. His brother, who's very ill, we all know that his brother is catching the flu. But then Morris Houses Community Center don't even have no heat, and they're servicing our children in replace of whatever. Back to Verizon whatever they want to call that. What is that internet service called? Fios. I went to a board meeting with NYCHA back in 2014 to hear that NYCHA was giving Verizon another $5 million. You talk about your broadband services. Let me tell you what happened to our intercom services that we have not gotten restored since NYCHA went into the bed with Verizon back when. But they still continue to give them. Go to those board meetings, whoever the residents here on the phone, and you will see that NYCHA continues to spend $5 million with Verizon on a regular basis, and we still don't have intercoms. But the capital money is being wasted. I don't know to say to tear us down, because that Build Back Better situation, if I held out to wait for Build Back Better, thinking that my buildings would be repaired and opposed to going into red, I'm going to be sorry mistaken, because the physical needs assessment is beyond the $80 billion that we've been looking for. Once they targeted the 3 to 4 buildings that they're going to utilize first, it's almost a tear down situation to build it back up. But I'm scared to say that, because you know what I knew when Bush was getting ready to talk about he was closing public housing? That the people above will always need 100,000 poor people. Why? So that their cousin, uncle, sister, brother, father, and their daughters can have a job. But we're still not being servicing in the manner in which we need to be servicing it. And this is an epic portion emergency. New York City, if we was the epic center of the virus, we are the epic center of housing. Housing needs to be addressed here first and foremost. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Ms. Forbes. Thank you. And I want to tell everyone I did receive a text message from CCOP President Chair Danny Barber, and I do wish him well. And he did ask if we could make sure that you provide us with words from him. So thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now hear from Beverly McFarland, followed by Kevin Lindahl.
Starting time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Beverly McFarland. I am the Resident Association President for Senator Robert A. Taft Houses. I'm here tonight to also testify on the negligence of NYCHA and their protocols. I sit on the every 2 weeks in a meeting for the key performance indicators. That is data that NYCHA are given that gives to records for the for the federal monitor. I hear tonight everyone talking, NYCHA staff talking about what they don't know and what they do not know. I don't understand when there's a dashboard available to them that's called under the key performance indicators, that they can see everything that's happening because they give that information to the federal monitor. So why wouldn't they able to answer any of the questions that was brought to them by, if they have statistics and they have a data dashboard that has that they have to put this in for the monitor. Also, here at Taft, 4 days in a row, we had no water, period. Thank you, Brian, for expediting it, but this is a continuous problem here at Taft, and they are not this model, this neighborhood model crap that they talking about. It is not working. It is not working for any of these developments. It is the same people that they just shift around, and it's the same management is shift around to different developments, and we getting the same results. And also the blueprint for change, they are trying to bunch them together, the blueprint for change along with the transition plan. They are 2 separate entities, and they should not be on NYCHA's website as one entity. So I'm requesting that they take the blueprint for change down off their website, because that has not been approved by from HUD. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. We will now hear from Kevin Lindahl, followed by Joel Kupferman, and then Joshua Barnett.
Starting time.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about housing first. And there's these background checks for the homeless where they like to see what the misdemeanor record is, the criminal record, people in their background accused of trespassing, drug abuse, selling drugs, in some cases shoplifting. But all of this stems from, the belief was in Finland in this Housing First program was that this stems from the incredible stress of being homeless. All the energy that the homeless have to use is to try to survive. They don't know where they're going to sleep at night. They don't know how they're going to make it through the winter. So instead of having this background check that looks at the background and says, well, how do they have a misdemeanor? Do they have a criminal background? They said, what if the stress of trying to survive is what's causing them to engage in, drug use, selling drugs, trying to make money, trespassing? And so what they did is they said in Finland, let's do housing first. Let's get these homeless into homes, off the streets, relieve that stress, and see what happens to these other issues. And suddenly the other issues began to melt away. Shoplifting and misdemeanor offenses were reduced by over 80% when we said, you know what, forget about your background. We're getting you a place to sleep, a place to shower, a place where you can reorganize yourself, get back into the workforce. Shoplifting and misdemeanors dropped by 80%, drug use by 60%, and trespassing all but became non-existent because now these people had a place to stay. So I'm asking the Council of New York City to consider leading from the heart and implementing housing first. It worked in Finland, where we say, you know what, of course a homeless person is going to have an imperfect background. Look at how many more homeless people we have now with COVID, people who've never been homeless in their lives, freezing out there in the streets. Let's ignore the background first, get them in the housing, and you're going to see these criminal and misdemeanor issues. If Finland is a model for this, all but
expired.
Because it's the stress of being a homeless that's causing these other problems. If we get them in the homes and eliminate the red tape and these background checks, watch these other problems actually disappear. It's called Housing First, and it's out of Finland, and I think we should implement it here in New York City. And if we lead by the heart, this could save a lot of people. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We will now hear from Joel Kupferman, followed by Joshua Barnett.
Starting time.
I'm having a little trouble here.
We hear you, Joel.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am counsel to Alfred E. Smith Resident Association, St. Nick's, and resident to Preserve Public Housing. I think it's important to point out that public housing residents died from the coronavirus at a rate nearly twice their share of the city's population, according to a recent DOH study. A Harvard study has also showed a slight increase in PM 2.5, that's the dust exposure, causes a large increase in COVID mortality. NYCHA is totally a vulnerable population with asthmatics, elderly people, and 9/11 victims. What we're facing here under capital construction is haphazard construction, unfettered, unaccountable, and fatal to many, many residents, not only to the residents, and to the trees. New York City has 2,400 acres of open space, 1,400 acres of tree space in NYCHA. Capital construction rebuild plans have actually cut into those trees. The contractors are not been held accountable. We're losing more trees than are going in, and yet, despite all the evidence that we're presenting, we're not getting any type of payback or accountability of those people. New York City, New York State has a bad actor policy. NYCHA keeps on hiring bad contractors, doesn't hold them accountable. There's ways that you should weed them out and not hire the bad people. Natural resource destruction, like I said, continues. At Smith, they're building storm barriers that are ADA in violation. Not only they're bad ADA violation, but the Justice Department's going to require NYCHA to rebuild those. We should look at all the capital construction and make sure that it's ADA acceptable and not putting people in. I just want to say there's plenty, we've been working this for a long time, But also one more thing I want to say about the Public Housing Preservation Trust. The way the bill stands now, it exempts that whole change from any type of environmental review. It is totally wrong, illegal, and not only that, in the face of rising tide and climate change, you cannot transfer and take out all of these NYCHA properties out of environmental review and say it's okay. It's an insult to the health and the safety of all those NYCHA residents. Thank you. I'm open to questions. And there's also more testimony to do, but I really want to say is that all the information we brought on contractor malfeasance has just been disregarded by Capital Division. There should be more specifications in those contracts. And we've brought in federal agencies offering technical help to NYCHA Capital, which has been refused or ignored. There's a lot of resources that could be that have made available. And I believe that NYCHA should be pushed and the city council should make sure that those are reviewed.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Joshua Barnett.
Starting time.
Oh, yeah, hi, sorry. Yeah, my name is Josh Barnett, with Local 375 DC 37. I'm a delegate and shop steward. I'm also an architect in the NYCHA Design Department. I've been here since 1999. I would definitely want to signify what all the residents have said in terms of the conditions that they face, not having a voice at the table, also being really terrified of NYCHA's commitment to privatization, both under RAD and the blueprint, especially because I think both have strong union busting aspects. But in terms of what this count, and that the main problem we're facing is 40 years of chronic underfunding from HUD and from the feds and at all levels of government. But what this hearing is about is NYCHA making the worst of a bad situation. Councilmember Rosenthal kept on saying how staff has been cut. When I started housing in '99, there were 445 people in the technical titles. We're down to 245 now. We were down to 200 at one point. And a lot of that isn't the result of current NYCHA policy. Again, that's underfunding, but what management doesn't talk about, that they never talk about, is their shadow army of consultants that cost twice as much as we do, and somehow there's money for them, for the staff augmenters, for outsourcing. The bureaucracy is incredibly top-heavy. We don't need more project managers. We need more people to do the work. I've never seen an organization like this where there's more people invested in watching people work than actually executing the work. One resident said, NYCHA is so top-heavy, it's a wonder it doesn't topple over. So I know I'm running out of time, but the one thing that I would really urge this committee to do is do a full audit of NYCHA, how they spend their money on consultants, making sure they do get the best of every dollar, and making sure that you really hear from the staff and the residents, getting past the people who speak for us and speak to us directly, because we really know how bad NYCHA is tripping over itself. There's no reason why there should be any money left expended. We have the expertise to do it, but we're not being given the opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks very much. This concludes the public testimony portion of the hearing. If we have inadvertently forgotten to call on anyone to testify, please use the Zoom raise hand function now, and we will try to hear from you. I believe that we've heard from all present.
I just want to make sure that Ramona Farash, I know she testified earlier. I just want to make sure that her hand is not raised again for some.
Sure, Chair. Would you want to hear from her again at this point?
Yeah, I've had my.
I want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Thank you for. I don't know if you want to set the time. It should be
Starting time.
So listening to NYCHA's really disappointing responses, a couple questions came to my mind that I didn't hear asked. One of them was, has NYCHA adjusted its operating budget to reflect the decline in funding from Congress? The second one is the transformation plan, which you are touting as the answer to our issues and your obstacles to succeed at your jobs, is the implementation plan for the blueprint, which we have clearly rejected. So when will you be delivering a new operational plan that keeps us in Section 9, The next question is, what spending have you actually done on the blueprint plan itself? I know that there's a contract item for a consultant, like Josh just mentioned, for $250,000, but it's really difficult to search for your spending according to category. I can provide that to the council. And then regarding the community centers funding and turning to cornerstones, we still receive $25 per household. Is that correct? But you take a portion of that. What is that portion? And what do you do with the portion that you take out of tenant association funding? And finally, the recent storms have made it very clear that you are not being a good steward of our lands. And we don't have an arborist on staff at NYCHA, although you are one of the biggest landowners in New York City. When will you stop subcontracting arborists, and when will you actually hire one? And what pocket of funding will that come from? I gotta walk my dog, so I don't know if they have these answers, but I really have to run.
I appreciate you, and we will make sure that we respond to those questions.
And I want to thank you both for putting this together, and I really appreciate Chair Rosenthal's facial expressions because they matched mine a lot of times.
Time expired.
Alika, I wish you the best, and I know that we'll definitely, continue to see you do great things for us. And thanks so much for putting this together before the year ended.
Yeah, I'm not very good at poker.
I suck at poker. So does my dog.
But I too appreciate Chair Embry Samuel. Biden is so lucky to get her. NYCHA residents are so lucky to get her, for the record.
Helen, if I could just add, in terms of the arborist and the tree situation, we'll definitely get plenty of information to your committee.
Thank
That's
you.
a major problem at Smith. And it's actually probably millions of dollars worth of damage across the whole city at NYCHA.
Okay, thanks everyone for your testimony. I believe that this now concludes the time of public testimony as we've heard from all present. We thank you again for your patience and for coming to testify. I will now turn it back over to Chairs Embry Samuel and Rosenthal to close the hearing.
We have one more hand. I see Ms. Forbes' hand, and we'll close with Ms. Forbes.
Okay,
we'll close.
What I would also like to add, I'm very glad that the gentleman brought up, when I tell you that I see the dust, the asbestos, and the mold to the developments that these contractors have come to stir up, there's no consideration for our health at all whatsoever, and that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for sticking around and participating and showing up and just telling us your truth and adding to this discussion. As I said earlier, the purpose was for us to be able to get a understanding of how you are spending your funding and what are you going to do, as we move towards the future, knowing that and anticipating and a great amount of funding coming in from the federal government. So with that, I look forward to our conversations in the next couple of weeks, depending on what comes down from the federal government, and I'll kick it over to Chair Rosenthal.
I think you've covered all the bases, Chair Embry Samuel. Always a pleasure to have a hearing with you.
Okay.
And to be in service with you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. And with that, I want to thank Audrey Sun, Jose Condi, Ricky Chala, my deputy sitting right here, Naomi, as well as Everton, and the amazing Sergeant at Arms that we have that are doing so much work in the background. I thank you and appreciate you for all the work that you do. And I look forward to being at State in the Chamber so we can see each other face to face. So shout out to the Sergeant at Arms. And thanks for everyone for putting this together. And Audrey, I'm good.
Yes.